Our baby's been born. Come see with a congratulatory gift. As always, Lily's remarks are so tactless it's infuriating. She probably hasn't reflected on taking my fiancé away from me at all. In fact, she seems to be enjoying my reaction. When I stay silent, Lily laughs and says, "Why so quiet? Are you jealous, by any chance? Still holding on to Simon's memory?" Certainly, Lily looks down on me and just wants to assert her dominance. But unfortunately for her, I won't let things go the way Lily wants. "Sure, I'll visit you with my husband." I respond with a deliberately cheerful tone. "Huh?" Seeing Lily's dumbfounded expression, I can't help but smirk. I'm Kelly, turning 45 this year. My life hasn't been all smooth sailing. There was someone I loved and dated for a long time. His name was Simon, and we had worked at the same company. Initially, I had no romantic feelings for Simon. The reason? Simon wasn't particularly good-looking. If I were to rate his looks, he'd be somewhere below average. So, he deviated significantly from my preferences. The turning point in our relationship came during a company party. The company I worked for had a party for team building. And there was one boss who, when he drank, became incredibly troublesome.
"Kelly, are you really drinking?"
Normally, he was a composed person. He gave off the impression of a kind and settled boss in his 50s. When he got drunk, he'd start talking too much. That wasn't the only thing. When he was drunk, he'd excessively pester people. And he'd strongly urge people to drink more. Since it only happened while he was drunk, no one could really confront him about it. "Definitely," I replied calmly, but the boss didn't back down. "You don't need to be shy. Have more." Saying that, he tried to pour a large bottle of beer for me. I couldn't possibly keep up with such a high pace of drinking. I was puzzled about how to escape the situation when Simon said, "You're drinking too much. I'll be with you." Simon said that and took the boss away from me. He saved me. I genuinely thanked Simon at that moment. And when the drinking party ended and we were about to disband, Simon called out to me when I was about to leave alone. "Are you all right earlier?" The boss always gets like that when he's drunk. The best way is to handle it well. Simon furrowed his brows and expressed concern for me. "Thank you. If you weren't there, I don't know what would have happened." I conveyed my sincere gratitude to Simon. Being a newcomer at the company, I couldn't speak up to my boss. That's why Simon's kindness meant so much to me. Then, Simon confessed, "Actually, I've been a little interested in you, Kelly, for a while now. If you're okay with it, would you go out with me?" I was surprised and looked at Simon. His face was slightly red. Simon was my savior. Besides, I didn't have a boyfriend at the time, so I gave an immediate reply. "Yes. I'd love to go out with you." With my affirmative answer, Simon's face lit up. "Thank you. I'll make you happy from now on," he said, holding me tight. I think this moment was the peak of my happiness. At that time, I didn't know anything about what was to come with Simon. And after dating for 3 years, Simon proposed to me the other day. "Will you marry me? I want to marry you too." I immediately gave my enthusiastic answer. And I made a request to Simon. "I want you to meet my best friend at least once. Her name is Lily, and we promised to introduce each other. Since elementary school, I've had a best friend named Lily. Lily was incredibly cute and very popular with the boys because of her looks. Lily was skilled at using puppy dog eyes and had a touch of artifice. In elementary school, we had regular duties, and it was our responsibility to do it for the classroom. But Lily didn't seem to want to do it and would tearfully ask the boys, 'I'm feeling a little under the weather. Could you do it for me?' Of course, the boys she asked readily agreed. As a result, Lily hardly ever had to do the duty herself. In exchange, she was quite disliked by the girls. Backbiting was common, and it seemed like she was being avoided. I had a straightforward personality back then and played around with the boys outside. So, I didn't care about what others thought and became friends with Lily. Both of us stood out from the other girls in our class, and we were left with each other. After that, Lily and I developed a somewhat complicated relationship, and we've kept in touch ever since. Let's continue being good friends forever.
Yeah.
Saying that, we often laughed together. Lily and I had made a promise. The promise was to introduce the person we decided to marry to each other. Lily said, "We've been such good friends for so long. Let's marry the ones we approve of, and that's why we made this promise." Somehow, I liked Lily. She didn't engage in typical girls' flattery, which made me feel at ease. I believed that Lily felt the same way. So, I wanted to introduce Simon to Lily. When I explained the situation to Simon, he said, "Of course. She's your best friend, right? I'd like to greet her properly too," and he smiled.
Really? Great. I'll contact Lily right away.
At that time, I honestly didn't think much beyond fulfilling my promise with Lily. So, I never imagined the outcome that was about to unfold. On the day we had agreed upon, Simon and I waited for Lily at the cafe where we were supposed to meet. And right on time, Lily arrived. "Sorry for keeping you waiting. Is this the Simon that Kelly was talking about?" Lily appeared with her hair beautifully curled in an elegant style, and she immediately asked me about Simon. For some reason, her eyes were sparkling.
That's right. He's the person I'm getting engaged to. Isn't he wonderful?
I introduced Simon with a smile. Simon also smiled at Lily. "Nice to meet you. I'm Simon." Simon greeted Lily in a kind tone. And Lily replied to him with a smile. "I'm Lily. It's so nice to meet you, the wonderful person who's going to be Kelly's fiancé. As Kelly's best friend, I'm truly delighted." Lily said that, blushing. And she celebrated our engagement.
Congratulations! I'm really happy that Kelly is going to be happy, too.
Lily. I was genuinely moved by Lily's joy for my happiness. After that, we continued our cheerful conversation over coffee. "By the way, Kelly, you're marrying such an amazing person. I'm really envious," Lily said with a smile as she talked to me. I felt genuinely pleased by Lily's words. Then, Simon looked puzzled and asked, "Lily, do you have a boyfriend?" Certainly, Lily is cute in appearance. Normally, she would have already been married with children by now. But Lily smiles with a hint of loneliness. "I don't have much luck with men." Lily's demeanor was quite endearing, arousing protective instincts. A regular guy would typically take some action at this point. "Lily, you're so cute that I'm sure you'll find a wonderful person soon." I encouraged Lily in that way. Then, Simon spoke up.
"If it were me, I'd definitely cherish someone as cute as Lily. Maybe your luck has just been bad so far."
Upon hearing that, Lily smiled with delight. "Thank you both. I hope I can find a fiancé as wonderful as Simon." And she said that. We continued to enjoy our conversation as the three of us, and it was some time before it was time to leave. As we were leaving, Lily said to Simon, "Simon, can I have your contact information? If you want, I can share some special information about Kelly," with a mischievous grin in her voice. "Come on, Lily. Don't say weird things to Simon." I jokingly scolded Lily. Lily started laughing as if it were funny.
"I'm just kidding. I want your contact info for wedding planning. I want to be a bridesmaid as Kelly's best friend."
Lily said that, winking at me. Lily. I was sincerely moved by the fact that Lily was thinking about the wedding. So, Simon and Lily exchanged contact information.
"Well, I'll contact you again."
Lily said goodbye with a smile and left. After Lily had completely disappeared from view, Simon muttered, "Lily, she's a nice girl." Simon looked in the direction Lily had left. "Yes," I replied to him. At that time, I had no idea that this would be the beginning of a tragedy. Some time later. Lately, Simon has been slow to reply to my messages. I complained to myself while looking at my smartphone today. It was Sunday, and I had planned to go shopping by myself. It took me 30 minutes by train. I had actually wanted to go out with Simon. But unfortunately, he had turned me down.
Sorry. I have to work today too. It's a holiday overtime shift.
I received a message like this from Simon the day before yesterday. Lately, it has become difficult to contact Simon. And even when I asked him out on dates, he increasingly declined, citing work as the reason. I had already changed jobs a year ago, so I knew roughly when the busy season was at my previous company. Right now, it shouldn't be the busy season. Besides, there were colleagues from my previous company that I still frequently kept in touch with, but I had never heard that Simon was exceptionally busy.
I miss Simon.
I muttered like that, and my gaze happened to land on the terrace seats of a nearby cafe.
Huh!
There, I witnessed an unbelievable scene.
Why are Simon and Lily together?
Right before my eyes, Simon and Lily were sitting together at a terrace table, laughing and chatting. There might be some mistake. I quietly approached the two of them. Then, I overheard a conversation I didn't want to hear between the two.
I really don't have anyone but you.
You're so much cuter than Kelly. I really love you. Simon said that, smiling at Lily with affection, tightly holding her hand. Lily, not seeming to mind, replied, I'm way cuter than Kelly. I can understand why you'd switch from her. I couldn't believe the conversation unfolding between the two of them. They were supposed to be my beloved fiancé and my best friend. But now, they were speaking ill of me and enjoying it. I couldn't help but speak up to them.
Simon, Lily. What on earth is going on?
I think my face turned pale. And it seemed like the two of them hadn't even considered that I would be there.
What? Kelly? Why are you here?
Simon seemed flustered. Lily, on the other hand, remained composed and unapologetic. In fact, she was grinning and showed no signs of remorse.
Oh dear, we got caught,
she said, laughing. Lily's attitude made me tremble with unease.
I thought of you as my best friend, Lily.
We had been friends since elementary school. So, I had trusted Lily. I couldn't help but feel like crying, and my eyes welled up with tears. However, Lily, far from being concerned, just snorted in derision at me.
Lily!
I was stunned by the transformation in my best friend. Then, Lily spoke with a smile.
Best friend? There's no way I'd be friends with someone like you. You are just a stepping stone for me. Besides, Simon is mine now, you know?
Saying that, Lily wrapped her hand around Simon's arm. I was infuriated by Lily's attitude.
Why? You were happy about Simon and me getting engaged, right?
I pleaded with Lily desperately. Maybe I wanted to believe that there was still some conscience left in her. But Lily didn't seem to care at all.
I would never genuinely be happy about your wedding. You decided to get married before cute little me.
It's so irritating, isn't it?
That's...
I felt my strength drain away, and I collapsed to my knees on the spot. Simon tried to run to me for a moment, but Lily stopped him. Then she wore a triumphant expression.
Anyway, Simon is mine now. You can crawl on the ground like a loser, okay? Bye.
Saying that, Lily forcibly dragged Simon away from the scene. With no strength left, I was left alone. 3 years have passed since that terrible incident. At first, I was emotionally devastated by my breakup with Simon, but recently, I've been slowly regaining my smile. Of course, in the beginning, I cried endlessly. I hadn't talked to anyone about the broken engagement except for Lily. That's why I couldn't tell anyone and cried alone. In the end, they didn't apologize to me or anything. Since we had only been engaged and hadn't progressed any further. I didn't want to have anything to do with Simon and Lily anymore. So, I blocked their numbers and made sure I wouldn't receive any more messages from them. Since then, I've been able to live peaceful days. Little by little, I was able to heal the scars from my broken heart with Simon. Over the past 3 years, my surroundings have changed quite a bit. But it's during such times that another incident occurs. One day, my smartphone rang. When I checked the phone number, it was an unknown one. I found it strange, but I answered the call. Hello? The caller on the other end turned out to be someone I didn't want to hear from. Oh, you finally picked up. It's Lily. Long time no see.
Why, Lily? I blocked your number.
I muttered, turning pale. Lily responded with an indifferent attitude.
Since you blocked my calls, I had to change my number, you know? Don't want to trouble me.
Lily said that and chuckled. Clearly, Lily felt no remorse whatsoever. Talking to Lily would only bring back unpleasant memories. So I decided to get to the point and end the call.
So, what's the matter?
I asked in a cold tone, and Lily responded with excitement.
I had a baby. Come see us with a congratulatory gift.
Lily's words were as insensitive as ever. She probably hadn't reflected on taking away my fiancé at all. Instead, she seemed to enjoy my reaction. I could imagine her secretly gloating over the shock I must have felt. As I remained silent, Lily laughed and said,
Why so quiet? Are you jealous? Still hung up on Simon?
Lily continued to look down on me and seemed to want to assert her superiority. But she was out of luck. I wouldn't let things go as Lily wished.
Sure, I'll bring my CEO husband.
I replied in a deliberately cheerful tone. Huh? Lily was taken aback, and I couldn't help but smile. After a moment, Lily seemed to recover and began to mock me.
Kelly, have you gone crazy? A plain girl like you can't possibly marry the CEO.
Lily used foul language and insulted me. She must have convinced herself that my statement was a lie. So, I deliberately smiled with confidence.
Well, you'll see when you meet him, won't you?
Lily then said, Anyway, I think you're lying about getting married in the first place. If you come to my place alone, I'll just laugh loudly at you. Saying that, she laughed. I calmly asked for Lily's address and then hung up the phone. Lily's attitude on the phone was unforgivable. It was too terrible, and she looked down on me too much. Thinking back to the events from 3 years ago only fueled my anger. I would make sure she regretted calling me. I vowed to take revenge on Lily, firmly in my heart.
What's wrong? Is something the matter?
There, my husband Joshua spoke to me. Joshua was the same age as me, with a clearly defined face. He had a face that other women wouldn't ignore. He had a well-toned body, my ideal husband. The reason I could marry someone like Joshua was because we met at my new job. I have worked as a secretary at my new job. Having various knowledge happened to come in handy. My previous experience working for a major company was also valued. My work involved various tasks, including managing the CEO's schedule and accompanying him to business meetings. At first, I struggled because I couldn't match names to faces among our business partners. I made mistakes in arranging dinner reservations and was severely scolded. But I managed to get through it all, thanks to Joshua. While scolding me when I made mistakes, Joshua would also point out areas for improvement. He never berated me unfairly, and his dependable support was there to cover for my mistakes. He even helped me remember our business partners by looking at business cards together after work. With his support, I managed to keep working as a secretary. During that time, Joshua suddenly proposed to me.
It's sudden, but will you marry me?
We were what they call a zero-day dating couple. According to Joshua, he fell for me because I tried so hard to keep up with his pace. I thought that being with Joshua would help me grow in many ways. Just being by Joshua's side made work enjoyable for me. So, I gladly accepted Joshua's proposal and got married. I told Joshua about the call from Lily.
Lily said she had a baby and wants me to visit with a congratulatory gift.
I explained the situation to Joshua. He knew about the incident 3 years ago when Lily took Simon from me. I had told him when our marriage was decided. At first, I thought I couldn't marry Joshua while still carrying a torch for Simon. In the end, Joshua said it was okay, so I happily accepted his proposal. That's why Joshua frowned at Lily's insensitive remarks.
That woman is truly tactless. She stole my fiancé and yet acts like that? She's underestimating you too much,
Joshua said, even angrier than I was. Joshua's kindness touched me. I had a request for Joshua.
Joshua, would you mind going to Lily's place with me? I don't want to leave it like this with Lily. Having you there would be a great support for me.
When I made the request, Joshua smiled.
Of course, I'll go with you. I want to stand up to those who have hurt you. Besides, Kelly's former best friend is too malicious. We should set things straight here. Joshua.
I was moved by Joshua's kindness. Joshua gently placed his hand on my head and said,
Let's show them how happy we are together. Let them see that you're much happier than that woman.
That's right. I'm much happier now. Way happier than Lily, I said with a natural smile.
Yeah. That's the spirit. Kelly looks cuter when she's confident.
Joshua laughed heartily. And so, we decided to go to Lily and Simon's place together. On the day we were supposed to visit Lily and Simon, I pressed the intercom button at the entrance alone. Originally, Joshua was supposed to show up with me, but he received an urgent call from work and had to come later. However, he was nearby, so I didn't feel alone. As soon as I knocked at the door, Lily appeared and, upon seeing me alone, she smiled with delight.
So, you're alone after all. You're not very good at hiding your lies.
Lily said this and burst into laughter.
My husband will be here later, so here's this for now.
I handed her a paper bag.
Thank you. You're quite the diligent one, huh? Even after I stole your fiancé.
Lily said with a wicked laugh.
I just have a lot of stuff to give away at home. I just brought something random,
I replied calmly.
Giveaways, huh? Did you have that many friends? You probably bought it, didn't you? Well, you're single, so you must have money,
Lily said, making a baseless assumption. She still seemed to think of me as single, and she was probably more convinced now that I was alone. Lily opened the bag and excitedly exclaimed, "It's a gift card. Since it's mine, don't expect me to return it. What should I choose?" I watched Lily with a cold gaze. Then, Simon, holding the baby, came out from inside.
Kelly. Long time no see,
Simon said, looking slightly awkward.
Congratulations on your child's birth.
I greeted Simon politely without making eye contact.
Oh, thank you,
Simon replied without looking at me. Lily, observing our interaction, confidently said,
Could it be that you still have feelings for Simon?
It's been 3 years, you know?
Stop clinging to my husband.
Lily had a triumphant look on her face.
No, that's not the case,
I immediately denied. But Lily mocked, "Oh dear, you don't have to pretend to be strong."
Hey, Lily, stop.
Seeing Simon's discomfort, Joshua tried to intervene, but Lily wouldn't stop.
By the way, what's a CEO's husband?
A plain girl like you.
Not to mention a CEO, you wouldn't even attract any man. Well, maybe an 80-year-old grandpa for caregiving?
Lily said and laughed. It was clear that Lily had a strong dislike for me. I asked her something I had been curious about for a while.
Why did you steal Simon in the first place? He's completely different from your usual type, isn't he?
Lily should have had a similar taste to me. Lily casually replied.
Well, he's not my type in terms of looks. Maybe it's because of his money? He's from a big company, after all. And I find it fun to take things from others, especially when the person is as plain as you.
Lily said this and chuckled.
Huh? What do you mean?
Simon was clearly shaken. Well, that made sense. Simon probably thought Lily loved him. Lily was very good at giving that impression. Ignoring Simon, I turned to Lily.
I'm grateful to you for taking Simon away. After all, I was able to marry a wonderful person.
I said with a smile, trying to hide my true feelings. Lily had a smirk on her face.
Marriage is just an act, isn't it? You really made a fool of yourself. Aren't you embarrassed?
Lily was oozing confidence. I wanted to expose Lily's true colors. While I was contemplating my response, a voice from behind, belonging to someone who had been eagerly waiting, interrupted us.
Joshua.
You're late.
Sorry. The CEO from our client company was talking for so long. I made it on time, so forgive me.
Joshua apologized with a hint of regret. As we were having this conversation, Lily, trembling visibly, approached me.
Kelly, what's your relationship with this handsome guy?
She probably had an idea of the answer, but didn't want to believe it. Lily was visibly shaken. Simon, wearing a puzzled expression, was looking at me and Joshua. So, I smiled and answered.
This is my husband, Joshua. Handsome, isn't he? What?
Joshua stepped forward and introduced himself, saying, I apologize for being late. I was on a call with a client. I'm Joshua, the CEO of Future Corporation. Nice to meet you. Joshua handed his business card to Lily and Simon, who started to react with excitement.
Future Corporation, the recently listed company, right? Trading cards and expanding your stores. Wait a minute, this guy. I think I've seen his face on a video streaming site. Could he be a famous personality?
Then Joshua replied with a warm smile, Oh, you've heard of me? We have quite a few followers on our company's social media account, maybe around a few million? Lily was deeply shaken. In fact, Joshua was the president and CEO of Future Corporation. Over the past few years, the company has rapidly expanded its stores. Recently, trading card transactions have been doing well not only for gaming purposes but also for collecting. Joshua had recognized this potential early and expanded the business. Originally, Joshua loved trading cards. He had been collecting them since he was in elementary school. He had always wanted to turn his passion into a job, so he founded his own company. Of course, running a business was not easy. And Joshua had been working hard from a young age. That's why he didn't have time for romance. Thinking about all this, Lily muttered with a pale face.
Is this a lie? Why is the plain Kelly winning? A CEO's wife? That's impossible.
I sighed heavily. Lily.
I don't think there's a competition in marriage, you know?
I muttered half in exasperation, and Lily shouted in frustration.
What?
Just because you married the CEO, you think you've won?
Why do you think I married Simon?
It's because he has money, and I can make you unhappy.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen a mediocre guy like Simon.
Lily laughed.
Lily!
Simon looked shocked. It might have been better if he didn't know the truth. Then Lily approached Joshua.
I want to marry someone like Joshua.
Joshua,
wouldn't you prefer a beautiful person like me over Kelly? Want to switch now? Lily!
Simon shouted, unable to control his anger. Lily chuckled, It's fine, right? If Kelly remarries Simon, everything will be back to normal. Lily rambled on with her absurd theories, and it became an incomprehensible conversation. Joshua smiled and said,
I fell in love with both Kelly's face and her personality. I'd never go for someone with a terrible personality like you. What? Why?
Lily protested. Lily was visibly upset, and Simon was bewildered. This situation couldn't continue. I spoke up.
Lily, you have a baby now. You should be happy with Simon. It's better to cherish the child you have with him.
Even after my words, Lily got agitated and blurted out, Huh? That child isn't Simon's. Simon's eyes widened.
Huh? What do you mean? If it's not mine, whose child is it?
I looked puzzled and asked Lily, who seemed to have realized her mistake immediately. She stammered, No, well. Simon, still holding the baby, confronted Lily, demanding an explanation. Lily and Simon's argument began.
There was no point in staying here any longer. "Joshua, let's go," I said to Joshua. In the end, Simon and Lily got divorced. One of my former colleagues contacted me and shared it as a topic of conversation. It seems their divorce turned into quite a messy situation. It turns out that the child Lily gave birth to wasn't Simon's biological child, which was discovered shortly after the chaotic incident. When Simon pressed her for answers, it was revealed that Lily had been unfaithful. In fact, Simon wasn't Lily's type, and their marriage was driven by financial motives. Lily had lost interest in Simon long before she took him away from me. Afterward, Lily continued her affair-filled life once she married Simon. While she had managed to keep her infidelity hidden in the past, this time Simon had hired a private investigator, and they uncovered most of her past actions. As a result, they decided to divorce. Lily had been a homemaker, spending money on beauty and fashion, and had no savings. That's why she strongly resisted the divorce, but it was just too malicious. And she eventually gave in when she was told the alimony would be increased. Lily ended up being asked for alimony by Simon. The amount was reasonable, but for a jobless Lily, it was a tough sum. Their child would be raised by Lily's family. The child was not to blame for what happened. It was Lily's wrongdoing. I fervently hoped that the child would grow up strong. Lily's affair partner was someone without much money, and it seemed that this incident would drive him away from Lily. It appeared that Lily had been lavishing her affections on the handsome guy, but her affair partner didn't seem to have any real love for her. While Lily was certainly beautiful, she was already in her 40s. To secure a good future partner, she would need to work on more than just her appearance. She would need to refine her inner self. However, Lily seemed oblivious to this fact. She still believed she could attract others with her looks alone. As a result, she would likely decline on her own. The future for a jobless woman with debts was uncertain at best. I couldn't help but think she got what she deserved. On the other hand, Simon seemed to be in a shell-shocked state. The baby that had been born was not his own. It must have been an unimaginable ordeal for him. However, it was Simon who chose Lily. He brought this upon himself. After the divorce, Simon was reportedly in a terrible state. He couldn't focus on work due to the shock, and his job might be at risk if this continued. If he lost his job at a major company, his future would be bleak. I hoped he would reflect deeply on his past mistakes. Since then, Joshua and I have been working hard together. Today was the grand opening of a new store. And it was a significant milestone for us. In this regard, we put in a lot of effort and dedication. Joshua also seemed to be wearing a proud expression on his face. We had supported each other throughout our journey. When Joshua faced challenges as the CEO, I encouraged him with all my might. When I encountered difficulties in my secretary role, Joshua tirelessly worked on finding solutions, even sacrificing his sleep. Previously, my relationship with Simon had been one where I relied on him entirely. But now, things are different. I wanted to work hard to support Joshua. So, I called out to Joshua. "Joshua, the CEO of our client company is here." "Got it. I'll be right there." Our relationship would remain the same. We would continue to lean on each other. That's what being a married couple meant to us. A sickly daughter is just a waste and of no use. I don't need such a child. You're a childless couple, so it's perfect for you, right? Be grateful to your sister. My sister came to our house and said that to me. Did the poor niece, who seemed to realize she was being abandoned by her mother, look like she was about to cry? Ever since she was born, my sister, who was allowed to do whatever she wanted, remained mentally a 3-year-old, even after becoming an adult, getting married, and having a child. Eventually, tired of my sister's whims, her husband abandoned her, and she returned to our parents' home. Now she's trying to remarry and is dumping her daughter on me because she's in the way. 11 years later, my sister, who had remarried a company president and was strutting around as the president's wife,
came back to me. She looked nothing like a president's wife, shabby and emitting a foul smell. My sister, who abandoned her daughter, now shamelessly asked for help, but my sister's evil schemes were exposed, leading to even more tragedy for my sister and her husband. I'm a married woman in my late 20s. I have one older sister. My sister was born sickly and grew up believing it was her right to monopolize our parents' love. Our parents, feeling guilty about her frailty, never said no to her whims. It might have been okay until I was born. By the time I was old enough to understand, our house was completely centered around my sister. As I grew up and started asserting myself, our parents always made me give in. Because my sister was sickly and pitiable, it was only natural for me, the healthy one, to endure, they said. I understood that as a child. But I began to question why I always had to endure everything after I started kindergarten and realized that not everything revolved around my family. Expanding my connections beyond my parents and sister, I learned that there were people enduring hardships while living their lives with strength, despite not being sickly like my sister. My sister was beautiful and always indoors, so she was pale. People who didn't know her true nature often said she was like a frail, beautiful girl, and she seemed quite pleased with that. She knew exactly how to gain sympathy and favor from others. At home, she was a selfish princess, but in front of others, she played the role of a caring, considerate sister who endured and persevered. Those unaware of her true nature were easily deceived. Until I went to kindergarten. I never had anything of my own. I never had personal belongings because everything was hand-me-downs from my sister. In nicer terms, they were my sister's cast-offs, but she hated the idea of her things being passed on to me. So she would deliberately damage or dirty them. You're using my cast-offs? How dare you take things from a sickly person like me? That's why I make them unusable. She would dirty or cut them right in front of me. Naturally, my parents noticed the torn clothes, but my sister would coolly claim that I didn't want her hand-me-downs and tore them up in front of her. My parents said they wouldn't buy new things for a child who didn't take care of them, so I had to wear those tattered clothes. You should be grateful and wear what your sickly sister gave you with care. When I went out in torn clothes, some neighbors worried if I was being mistreated. When I repeated what my sister told me to say, they would praise me as a good, sister-loving child and sometimes mend the torn parts for me. When I started kindergarten, my parents couldn't keep up the pretense and finally bought me clothes, a bag, and other necessities. My sister had never been to kindergarten due to her frailty, so there were no hand-me-downs. I was thrilled to finally have clothes and a bag of my own. But my sister resented that I went to kindergarten and had things she never got. She often took my bag and lunchbox. But the next day, when I wasn't ready for kindergarten, the already busy mornings became even more hectic, and suspicion turned towards her. Then she would coolly claim she saw me put them in a different place, shifting the blame to me. I was scolded harshly by my mother. That's when I realized. Not only should I not defy my sister, but I also couldn't show off or be happy in front of her. I had to stay quiet and suppress my existence in front of her to avoid her wrath. That's when I realized I had no place in this house. When I was in elementary school, they started to find effective medications for my sister's illness. After trying various ones, she recovered to the point of having a healthy body. She began to attend sports activities, which she often missed before, without any difficulty. However, she didn't want to let go of the family life that had always revolved around her. Like the time we went to buy a backpack for me. My sister wanted a new one because she was bored of her current one, saying the old one would be fine for me. My parents thought it was unfair that I was the only one with a hand-me-down when everyone else had brand new backpacks. It was the same with new stationery and clothes. As for clothes, my sister was slim, and I had grown more as per my age, so hand-me-downs were no longer practical. My parents, who had always prioritized my sickly sister, began treating us more equally as she recovered. They used to tell me to endure because my sister was sick, but now they told her to help out as much as she could since she was the older sister. Why do I have to help? What if I do something extra and my illness relapses?
The doctor had told us that a relapse was unlikely unless she did excessive exercise. But my sister resisted, throwing things nearby or screaming so loudly it could be heard by neighbors when our parents didn't listen to her. Eventually, her demands were often met. Interestingly, the screams she made were blamed on my tantrums or selfishness. When it became a problem at school and in the neighborhood, everyone believed it was me causing trouble, praising my sister for putting up with a difficult younger sibling. I thought to myself, they don't know anything, yet they make such baseless comments. When my sister graduated from elementary school, I was relieved that we wouldn't be in the same school anymore. In middle school, where she had already graduated, I was glad not to be compared to her. I gradually became more involved in the sports team, while she began hanging out with flashy boys from other schools. I continued the sports I started in middle school through college and got a job at a local company. My sister, although she went to college, didn't look for a job and just hung around, living off our parents' money. She quickly married a guy she reconnected with from college. Initially, her husband tolerated her whims, saying a little selfishness in a woman was charming. But after she had a child and continued her selfish behavior, he couldn't take it anymore and left when their daughter was 4. I felt he was ready to give up everything just to get away from my sister. A year before my sister's divorce, I married a coworker who was actually 4 years older than me. Our marriage happened when her marriage was already falling apart. My niece, like my sister in her childhood, was frail. You'd think my sister, having gone through the same, would be understanding and make her daughter the center of her life. But she was different. Looking at my daughter irritates me. What's the point of living if she can't do anything normal? My sister would say to her daughter. Repeated incidents like these led to their divorce. Oddly, my sister refused to let her ex-husband take care of their daughter. Marrying me meant my husband suddenly learned all the family drama. I was worried he'd be disgusted and consider divorce. After all, who wants to deal with troublesome in-laws? But he reassured me, saying that while marriage does link families, it's ultimately about the individuals involved. He committed to standing by me and overcoming hardships together. And he's proven it time and again. After my sister's divorce, she took her daughter and moved back home. My husband and I had set up our home near my parents' place. He suggested living near my parents so we could help them if needed. When my sister got married, she didn't want to live near our parents' house. Although our parents said not to worry about them, deep down, it was still a concern. And yet, to our surprise, she returned home after her divorce. Her selfishness was as strong as ever. Initially, she helped our parents take care of my niece, but gradually, she started leaving her with them more and more, preferring to go out and have fun. My parents did their best not to burden us, even though we lived nearby. But eventually, we found ourselves taking care of my niece more often. I was wary, knowing she was my sister's child. I even briefed my husband about my sister's long history of unreasonable behavior, preparing him for the worst. However, my niece turned out to be a very good kid, unlike her mother. At first, my niece was reserved and seemed scared around us, but she warmed up after spending some time together. It turned out my niece's fear came from my sister yelling at her. My parents also asked us to be understanding. Slowly, my niece began to help around the house and followed our instructions well. I believe her father, my former brother-in-law, must have raised her well. My niece grew up mostly without her mother's love, shuttling between my parents' house and ours until she was 6. Then, one day, my sister showed up at our house with my niece. I'm getting remarried to a company president. He doesn't want a sickly child because they're just money pits and bad luck. Take this child for my happiness. I realized my sister's selfishness was kicking in again. When I asked if our parents knew about this, she retorted that it was none of my business. And she insisted I should just do as told. Don't tell her father either. Officially, she's staying with me, and you childless folks are kindly helping out. Let's stick to that story. I was dumbfounded. My niece, who may not have understood everything, clearly knew she was being abandoned by her mother.
how pitiful it was that even such a horrible mother meant something to her.
If you're going to push her off on us, then we won't just be part-time caretakers for our niece. We will legally adopt her and raise her as our own child.
I declared, without consulting my husband, that if my sister was pushing her off on us, we wouldn't just be part-time caretakers. My husband, who happened to overhear, was also furious at my sister's attitude and agreed with my decision. He added that ultimately, it was up to my niece. No way.
If her father finds out, I won't get child support. Remember, don't tell him about the remarriage.
What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister nonchalantly revealed that she refused to let her ex-husband have custody because she was receiving child support, which she wasn't using for my niece but for her own leisure. Apparently, even our parents didn't know this. She threatened me not to tell anyone, hoping to continue receiving child support while dumping the actual care on us. I was astounded by her audacity and nonsense. I knew we had to get her to agree to the adoption, or my niece would continue to be a pawn in her games. I was determined not to let my niece suffer like I did. My husband suggested, as long as nobody tells, he won't find out. After threatening us one more time about meddling, my sister left my niece with us and departed. We then asked my niece what she wanted. Despite being only 6, she had her own will. We wanted to respect her feelings as much as possible. And so did my parents. With tears in her eyes, she decided to become our child. Those tears seemed more like tears of joy than resignation. To avoid any trouble when my sister returned, we quickly finalized the adoption process with my niece. After that, I tried to contact my sister to inform her, but she had remarried and became unreachable.
Now that I'm the president's wife, I don't want you coming to me for money.
Goodbye, poor people.
Don't contact me ever again.
My sister's phone number and email were no longer in use. When I told our parents about this last conversation with her, they were furious to a degree I had never seen before, despite always favoring her in the past. They declared they would cut ties with her and never welcome her back home. However, they didn't need to worry. My sister never contacted them either. Little did we know, cutting off contact with us would lead to an unbelievable turn of events, but that would happen a bit later. We raised my niece with love and sometimes strictness, as if she were our own daughter. She grew up to be a sincere, kind, and well-rounded child. During this time, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My niece treated him as her real brother and actively participated in his care. Her frail health, a concern since her childhood, improved under the care of my sister's former doctor. By middle school, she had developed physically like her peers and became stronger. The doctor mentioned that environmental factors can contribute to frail health. My sister relegated my sickly niece to the position of a burdensome child and neglected to improve her condition. It might have been why it took so long for my niece to get stronger. As she grew healthier, my niece became more proactive in absorbing various experiences. We encouraged her interests, without forcing anything on her. We wanted her to learn that it's sometimes necessary to give up, as not every experience is a waste of time. This perspective might come from my own youth spent in sports, where injuries are common and you have to decide whether to continue or take a different path. I struggled with various concerns, but in the end, it's up to me to make the decision. Ultimately, it's up to the individual to decide and take responsibility for their choices. I asked my niece if she was ready to take responsibility for quitting something midway and if she would have no regrets or blame others for her decisions. She assured us that any decision she made was her own responsibility, so we didn't say anything more. My niece tried various sports but didn't excel beyond the average level. Though my husband and I are sports enthusiasts, we never pushed our interests on her. She was creative and quick-witted, excelling in her studies and always among the top students. She went to a private high school known for its unique educational approach that focused not only on academics but also on nurturing each student's individuality. At this school, my niece and a friend became passionate about developing a new product. Initially, they provided their prototype, a groundbreaking new product born from their combined experiences, to hospitals and nursing homes. My niece, though healthier, still had difficulty hearing in one ear and occasionally used a hearing aid. She had been teased in elementary school for it. And her friend's grandmother refused to wear a hearing aid, calling it unattractive, which led to communication difficulties and family conflicts. That's when they came up with the idea. What if hearing aids were cute or stylish accessories? They began by attaching their designs to existing hearing aids, which unexpectedly gained popularity. A hearing aid company proposed a collaboration. And they decided to start a business as high school entrepreneurs, becoming a local sensation. Their product was featured in the regional newspaper and later introduced on local television. Word of mouth about my niece's business spread, and profits soared. There were even requests for stylish canes, not just hearing aids. My niece managed to balance business and studies, reaching her senior year of high school without neglecting either. It was a fulfilling 3 years for both her and us, her adoptive parents. It had been 11 years since she became our daughter. We hadn't heard from my sister in all this time, so we thought we'd never see her again. Then, out of the blue, my sister contacted us when only my niece was home. My niece answered the phone, not knowing it was her biological mother. Our home phone has settings to block nuisance calls. Since there was no alert, my niece inadvertently answered it. My niece wouldn't say exactly what my sister said, but she expressed a desire to meet my sister. My husband and I were torn. Could it be that despite everything, she still yearned for her biological mother? We debated whether it was right for us to have a say in this, worrying if it was arrogant of us. Eventually, we decided to respect my niece's wishes but requested to be present if she met her mother. We waited at the designated place and time. And a drastically changed sister appeared. Her hair was dull with streaks of gray. Her face gaunt and covered in blemishes. And her clothes were ill-fitting and worn. Behind her were her husband and a small child. Look at my luck. Who would have thought my daughter would turn out to be a moneymaker? She said with a hoarse, dry laugh. Apparently, her husband's business had failed, they lost everything, and now lived in a shabby apartment. They were struggling, waiting for discounted meals at supermarkets when my sister saw my niece on a street TV, now famous as a high school CEO. She had looked up everything about my niece, including her new product developments. It seemed she planned to leech off my niece's company, even contemplating taking it over. Look, this is your brother. You'll be the breadwinner now. Work hard for our sake and let us live comfortably, she said, grabbing my niece's arm as if to take her away. How dare she say such things? She's not your daughter anymore. I thought to myself. I was about to warn her that I'd report it as an abduction if she tried to take her away in front of us, but my niece shouted first. Who are you? I don't know you. Don't call yourself my mother, it's annoying. My parents are these two right here. My real brother is waiting for us at our grandparents' house. My sister became hysterical, screaming about the debt of raising her. Her habit of shrieking when things didn't go her way, even as an adult, was evident. Is it okay to make such a scene here? If you don't back down, I can let your ex-husband hear this. I threatened, pulling out an old voice recorder. It played the conversation from 11 years ago when she abandoned my niece, including her threats about child support. My sister lunged at me for the recorder. But my husband stepped in to protect us. Did you know that you're still entitled to child support payments even if you remarry? She seemed unaware that remarrying doesn't stop child support payments. But you forfeit your rights when you give up custody, don't you? They won't find out if I don't tell them? The world doesn't work that conveniently. Actually, when we were finalizing the adoption, we met with my niece's biological father, who had asked us to redirect the child support payments to us. But we refused the child support. We wanted my niece to meet her biological father if she ever wished to, and vice versa. I believed it was her biological father who had taught her manners and decency. He was too kind and selfless, always putting my niece's happiness before his own. We conveyed to him that my niece would be saddened if he weren't happy, and he understood. Later, he remarried and had children. My sister, his ex-wife, seemed oblivious to the fact that child support payments had ceased. At the time of her remarriage, she was living a life of luxury without financial worries. However, after the bankruptcy, she must have realized the missing child support payments.
"Damn it! It was your doing, wasn't it?" she accused.
She had noticed the absence of payments but refrained from contacting us, not wanting to reveal her fallen state. It was puzzling why she would leech off my niece while still maintaining some pride. Perhaps she thought her daughter would sympathize and help her out. But the misuse of child support money didn't seem to be something that could be easily addressed, as my sister was not in a state to make rational decisions. She left hastily with her young son, possibly fearing legal action from her ex-husband. Yet, my sister persisted in stalking my niece. We frequently received messages from the high school about a suspicious old woman lurking around. My sister, who, despite being in her 30s, appeared much older due to her unkempt appearance. Eventually, she was perceived as a threat by other parents and the school's security, and even reported by students. My husband ultimately confronted her, causing a commotion that attracted our neighbors. The community united to chase her away. Since then, she has avoided our neighborhood, deterred by locals brandishing brooms and bats. My sister and her husband, with their young child in tow, sought financial help from our parents, revealing that they had been parasitically living off the supposed non-existent child support. This deception, along with her lifestyle funded by child support, led to our parents cutting ties with her and kicking her out. Our mother, meticulous with finances, had kept detailed records of all the assistance provided to my sister and demanded repayment. Apparently, my mother, having been deceived, furiously demanded the return of everything she had been swindled out of. My sister and her husband, told never to show their faces again or else they'd be forced to repay the swindled money by any means necessary, never contacted us again, as they had no money to repay. My sister, still selfish, eventually abandoned her child at a facility, leaving without any words of return. She hopped from job to job, causing problems and getting fired. She stayed married, thinking she couldn't survive otherwise, while her husband, held back by his pride, struggled to find employment. They believed it was better to keep the slightly earning sister than separate. However, expecting her to be a provider was futile. Now, I hear they live on the streets, scavenging for leftovers. Meanwhile, our family, firmly grounded, enjoys fulfilling days. My niece is soon to take her college entrance exams, aspiring to study business management abroad and expand her current business. I wholeheartedly support her in these endeavors.
Getting married for the first time after 40? That's unbelievable. A woman rushing to get married at that age is still considered a late bloomer, no matter what. Seriously, it's just embarrassing. I mean, it'd be somewhat acceptable if it were a shotgun wedding, but getting married after 40 without even being pregnant.
When living with my in-laws, my sister-in-law suddenly returned home after getting divorced. Sister-in-law, who initiated the divorce, bragged about being on the winning side. She was adamant that her ex-husband was useless and deserved to be dumped. Now back home, my sister-in-law does nothing but laze around, receiving an allowance from our mother-in-law for her nightlife. After a while, my sister-in-law, who had returned home, said she was getting remarried and would have an heir, so I should leave. Remarrying? With that person? That seems impossible. When I objected, my sister-in-law flew into a rage like she had lost her mind. But, my sister-in-law had a shocking secret. My husband and I met and got married after we both had turned 40. We had prioritized our careers over love life, so by the time we realized, we were already 40. We shared the same values and hit it off right from the start, meeting frequently. At that time, marriage wasn't on our minds. The reason was my husband was the eldest son. He told me not to worry about not being married till 40,
as his parents had long given up on the idea of having grandchildren. He also mentioned that he preferred a childless marriage. After a while, when we met my husband's parents, they were very approachable and told us that marriage is a matter for the couple to decide. Encouraged by their words, we decided to get married. Both my husband and I had been living alone for a long time, so we had a thorough discussion about our new home. His parents mentioned that they had a spare room and suggested we consider moving in with them. I had lived alone longer than I had with my parents, so it wasn't easy for me to make an immediate decision. I wondered what it would be like living with the older generation, as I couldn't quite imagine it. My husband made a wry smile at the thought of moving back home. However, considering our aging parents, he started to lean towards the idea of living with them for peace of mind. We visited his parents' house numerous times, staying over the weekends to see if I could agree with his idea. His father was very kind and caring. My mother-in-law has a somewhat sarcastic way of speaking, but it seems she's like that with everyone, including my father-in-law and my husband. Once I realized that it was just her nature to be like that, I gradually became less bothered by it. I felt I could manage, and 6 months after our marriage, we started living with my in-laws. My mother-in-law had been a full-time homemaker, adept at managing all household chores. After retiring, my father-in-law was rehired and worked 3 days a week. However, after a while of living with us, he decided to completely quit his job and enjoy his retirement. My father-in-law actively participates in helping with family chores and spends his days fulfillingly, including going on his routine walks. Although my mother-in-law was strict with household chores, I didn't mind it. She could be harsh or slightly sarcastic, but she was generally in a good mood when tasks were done correctly. She wasn't a perfectionist and was open to adopting time-saving methods for household chores. With the time saved from her efficient approach to chores, my mother-in-law enjoys watching foreign romance dramas. Her face looked so happy during those times, it made me feel like she's not a bad person at heart. Maybe I just wanted to believe that's just the way she is. For the first year of living with my in-laws, things went well, and we had a happy, laughter-filled home. That was until my sister-in-law arrived. One day, as we were nearing the end of our first year living there, 38-year-old Emily returned to the family home without any warning. It appeared she had gotten divorced. My sister-in-law often bragged that she was the one who left her husband, sharing many stories about her divorce. Some of her tales made me question things, but I understood that divorce can be more challenging than marriage and she must have gone through hardships. I didn't want to pry too much, so I just lightly listened to my sister-in-law's dramatic tales without delving deeper. Listening to sister-in-law, it seemed she initiated the divorce, and it was her ex-husband who caused the breakup. Yet, she hadn't received any alimony. Moreover, it turns out she hadn't received her share of the property division either. Isn't that a bit harsh? I advised her that she could still claim her share of the property division even after the divorce, but she just said, "I don't need anything from that man," and left it at that. If my sister-in-law's claims are true, then she's entitled to a share of the property division, right? I wondered. Or maybe, she just wanted to leave him so badly because he was such a terrible man. Only the couple themselves really know what's going on in their marriage, so my husband suggested we just wait and see, and I agreed. However, even after 6 months since she returned, Emily continued to live in our family home like a guest, not doing any housework. At 38, she still received an allowance from our mother-in-law and spent it on expensive shopping. My husband couldn't overlook this any longer and confronted our mother-in-law, saying it was too much to keep giving Emily an allowance. Our mother-in-law argued that Emily had suffered enough in her marriage, so a little indulgence was okay. Moreover, our mother-in-law, saying Emily was heartbroken and deserved sympathy, didn't heed my husband's advice. Hearing only one side of the story, one might think it's true. The time it takes to heal emotional wounds varies from person to person. However, it's also true that there was a tense atmosphere in the family. My husband and I decided to seek my father-in-law's judgment. He was calm and gave an impartial opinion. He said it was fine for my sister-in-law to stay until she settled down,
but reminded her that the house is also ours. He told her not to act like she owned the place and to either help around the house or get a job to contribute to living expenses. He clearly stated that she should move out once she had a plan. But for my sister-in-law, not having anyone but our mother-in-law on her side, and not receiving sympathy for her divorce, seemed to be a source of dissatisfaction.
It was supposed to be my place in this family, but because a woman over 40 became a bride, now I have no place.
Really? It's crazy.
My own daughter is being pushed out of the house. Ever since you came, Dad only takes your side. You're the outsider here, don't butt in.
Frustrated that things weren't going her way, my sister-in-law joined forces with our mother-in-law to attack me. Furthermore, my sister-in-law started feeding lies to our mother-in-law about me. She claimed that I was bad-mouthing our mother-in-law behind her back.
You've been spreading rumors in the neighborhood that my clothes smell like an old lady.
She also spread rumors that I was seen walking with a young man, that I was a big spender, and that my cooking was too salty, all things I had no idea about. At first, I denied it, suggesting it might be a misunderstanding. However, there was a time when Emily played an audio clip that sounded like my voice bad-mouthing our mother-in-law, claiming it as proof. In today's world, it's an era where fake audio and videos can be easily made with apps, even without much knowledge. When my father-in-law came across my mother-in-law and Emily attacking me, he defended me and revealed Emily's tricks right in front of our mother-in-law. My father-in-law, having worked in IT, was proficient with smartphones. He demonstrated how to create a fake voice recording on the spot, making it sound like sister-in-law was bad-mouthing our mother-in-law. Our mother-in-law understood how easily it could be done, but she became convinced that my father-in-law and I were conspiring together. In front of my father-in-law and husband, she behaved, but when they weren't around, she took every opportunity to make snide remarks at me.
Everyone over 40 is just an old lady. Don't think you're still young.
Exactly.
Once you're close to 60, you're definitely an old woman.
Approaching my mid-40s, I was already feeling the physical effects of aging. But I didn't think it was my sister-in-law's place to comment. You'll be in your 40s in just a couple of years too, I thought to myself. I decided it was a waste of time and effort to engage with them and chose to ignore their behavior. Then, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law escalated from verbal jabs to more noticeable actions. I continued working even after getting married, and my husband understood that. Even when we started living with my in-laws, my lifestyle didn't change much, even after my sister-in-law moved back in. My varying work hours made it difficult for them to time their harassment to my arrival. So, they started causing trouble while I was asleep. Hiding or dirtying my work shoes was just the beginning. My father-in-law is the earliest riser in the morning. He sometimes goes for walks in the early morning, and our mother-in-law prepares breakfast according to his schedule. My husband and father-in-law ate breakfast at the same time, while I would eat once they were finished. The reason for the time difference is that my father-in-law and husband prefer scrambled eggs, while my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and I prefer fried eggs. After my father-in-law and husband finished and left the table, I would be served weak coffee that barely had any color or taste. They've been harassing me in various ways, like tampering with only my portion of the food to make it taste odd. But I ate everything without showing any reaction on my face. This was because they weren't doing anything that could cause poisoning. The harassment from my mother-in-law and Emily was focused in the mornings, and I was too busy to point out every incident. Besides, I didn't want to worry my father-in-law, who always treated me kindly, especially since the time when it was just the three of us was limited. I thought once my sister-in-law moved out, our mother-in-law would change her attitude. However, an incident occurred that pushed my patience to its limit. This happened on a day when both my father-in-law and husband were out, and I had a day off from work. My sister-in-law and our mother-in-law seized the opportunity to verbally attack me. All work, work.
You act like a career woman, but aren't you really just a cleaning lady at the office? Those times when you're called in, that's just to point out mistakes in your work or to give you warnings, right? It's because women like you try to compete with men in the workforce. That's why you end up rushing to get married at 40. Think about how inconvenient it is for the family taking in a bride over 40. My mother-in-law accused me of approaching my husband just for his income and deceiving him. She claimed that my parents raised me poorly, which is why I turned out to be a woman who mistakenly thinks she's competent at work. What's important for a woman is to be charming and loved by men, sister-in-law and our mother-in-law proudly asserted. The fact that I didn't marry until after 40 was my own choice, not my parents' fault. Moreover, our mother-in-law looked down on my parents, saying, "It can't be helped since you were raised by parents who neglected their parenting duties." My parents never neglected their parenting duties. I argued back, "Don't twist the truth and speak ill of people who aren't here. It doesn't matter about your parents. You can tell the quality of the parents by looking at their child. Besides, find a place to live as soon as possible. Even in an era of late childbirth, it's impossible at your age, almost 50. Our daughter is going to remarry and have a child, so she will continue living here. You need to leave." I had an idea why they suddenly became so explicit about wanting me out. Recently, we had discussed the deteriorating condition of the family home and decided to rebuild it. My sister-in-law and our mother-in-law planned to continue living in the newly rebuilt home and wanted to drive me out. They told my father-in-law that I was relentlessly harassing my sister-in-law in an unbearable manner. They claimed that the situation was beyond their control and reported this to him. I couldn't imagine my father-in-law believing our mother-in-law's words, and I burst into laughter at their futile acts. Just then, my father-in-law and husband returned home as if on cue. Immediately, my sister-in-law and our mother-in-law began their act, tearfully claiming that my sister-in-law had been mistreated by me. Their performance was so stilted that I struggled to hold back my laughter. My father-in-law and husband didn't believe their claims at all, affirming that I wouldn't do such things. Our mother-in-law questioned how they could be so sure without having seen anything. My husband countered, asking how she could not know what kind of person I was after living together for over a year. My father-in-law pointed out that things were fine until my sister-in-law returned, and he even questioned whether our mother-in-law was being blackmailed into siding with sister-in-law. Our mother-in-law seemed to lose her fighting spirit as she was cornered. As she became more desperate, sister-in-law's claims grew more exaggerated. "Look at this injury on my knee. She pushed me, and that's how I got this." My husband looked at her skeptically. "I heard you talking to Mom about getting that injury from falling off a bike, didn't I?" My husband explained that at the time, he took out a Band-Aid from the first aid kit and handed it to sister-in-law. My sister-in-law then started claiming it was a different injury. She said she had scraped the same spot again, which was healing. Our mother-in-law, as if suddenly remembering, started backing up sister-in-law's story again. My husband, wanting to see proof, insisted that my sister-in-law remove the bandage to show the condition of her injury. He reasoned that if it was just a common scrape, which everyone has experienced, even a layperson could tell how it was healing. "When were you pushed? Today? Yesterday?" My sister-in-law's response was vague and inconsistent, alternating between yesterday and today, clearly struggling to keep her story straight. She tried desperately to divert the topic and avoid showing the injury, but my husband and father-in-law were much better at addressing the facts. "Enough of this. A wife who offered to rebuild the house for me and Mom wouldn't do such a thing." My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who had thought it was my father-in-law and husband who proposed the reconstruction of the family home, showed us puzzled expressions. In reality, I was the one who suggested renovating the house to make it more livable for my aging in-laws. My own parents had passed away too early for me to show filial piety. My parents passed away so quickly that I hardly had any time to show filial piety. Seeing how my father-in-law, who was kind and considerate to me despite my initial anxieties about living in the family home, reminded me of my own father who used to extend a helping hand to those in need. Since I couldn't show filial piety to my own father, I thought of my father-in-law as a second father and wanted to show him my gratitude. When I told my husband about this, he was so grateful that he cried. To be honest, I had planned to use the money I had saved up for my father-in-law rather than for both in-laws. Frankly, I considered our mother-in-law more as an afterthought.
However, my sister-in-law and our mother-in-law, unaware of my true feelings, accused me of not contributing any money and said it was meaningless to just propose things without planning to stay. This angered my husband and father-in-law. They asked if my sister-in-law and our mother-in-law hadn't heard that I was going to cover the entire cost. But my sister-in-law and our mother-in-law refused to believe what my husband and father-in-law were saying. They kept saying that it was impossible for a woman who married into the family to have such a large sum of money, questioning where I could have possibly gotten it. My sister-in-law and our mother-in-law had been present during the discussions about the house renovations. However, their minds were so preoccupied with how to drive me out that they hadn't paid attention to the conversation. They assumed that the renovation would be funded by my husband's bonus and my father-in-law's retirement fund. In fact, I am the CEO of a company, but I had explained my job and position when I married into the family. However, it seemed my mother-in-law was stuck in the belief that a woman's job was limited to serving tea or answering phones. In this day and age, there are no companies where women's roles are confined to just that. If a company only allowed women to do such tasks, it would be problematic from various perspectives. My mother-in-law completely failed to understand that the times have changed and women's roles in the workplace have evolved significantly. I didn't introduce myself to my sister-in-law as a CEO, but I would answer if asked. My sister-in-law, too, seemed to have her own misconceptions about me, thinking of me as nothing more than a slightly elevated part-time employee. That's probably why she referred to me as a janitor at my company. Our mother-in-law and sister-in-law had such outdated ideas about women's work. The company I run was actually my father's, which I took over after he passed away. I didn't start the company, so I didn't feel it was something to boast about. My father-in-law resigned from his re-employment, partly because I suggested to him that if he was only working for living expenses, it was okay not to push himself too hard. At that time, he seemed tired of the burdens of life. He had worked hard for the family for many years. And I thought it was time for him to lay down his burdens. The reason is that my income alone was sufficient to support the four of us, my husband, my in-laws, and myself. The only reason you two can lounge around and shop without any worries is because of your daughter-in-law's earnings. Regarding my sister-in-law's reckless spending, it turns out my husband had been complicit in it. In reality, she would often come to him, claiming they were short on living expenses, and he would provide the money. Our mother-in-law and sister-in-law didn't realize that their comfortable use of money and the eagerly awaited house renovation were possible because of my income, and if they drove me out, it would no longer be feasible. Once they understood this, they quickly changed their behavior, becoming overly sweet and trying to ingratiate themselves with me. So, if you want me to leave, I will, but just so you know, the pillars in this house seem to be in pretty bad shape. The roof might even cave in, I said, knocking on a pillar, which emitted a creaking sound, causing my sister-in-law to scream. Our mother-in-law clung to me desperately, pleading not to damage the house. Afterwards, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law communicated with each other through eye contact and then apologized to me. Though it didn't seem sincere. It appeared more like a tactical move to simply bow their heads and quell their hostility towards me. Probably biding their time until the house was rebuilt to try and drive me out. I was astounded by their transparent behavior. Our mother-in-law and sister-in-law started making excuses on their own, even though I hadn't said anything. I said you should leave. It was all a misunderstanding on my part. My daughter has always been a bit scatterbrained. Exactly. This injury is from falling off my bike. The part about being pushed. I just finished watching a drama with such a scene and got it all mixed up. Basically, our mother-in-law was completely fooled by sister-in-law's misunderstanding. My sister-in-law herself was blurring the lines between reality and fiction. But you both have been saying various things all along, haven't you? I said, taking out my phone and playing recordings of their many insults. In fact, anticipating something like this might happen, I had been recording their verbal abuse on my phone. These recordings were not fake. By chance, I had also captured on video a recent conversation where my sister-in-law talked about remarrying and having an heir.
My husband had suspected that either sister-in-law or our mother-in-law might become assertive due to the house renovation. Hoping to capture something useful, he had discreetly installed a hidden camera near the kitchen where the three of us often were. By comparing my audio recordings and the footage, which were clearly not fabricated, my father-in-law erupted in anger. My husband, realizing the extent of their behavior, expressed his disappointment and embarrassment at being related by blood to our mother-in-law and sister-in-law. He and my father-in-law had noticed the harassment towards me and had warned them behind my back. However, our mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept making excuses and showed no signs of genuine remorse. But now, with undeniable evidence, there was no escaping the truth. My husband decided that he could no longer allow me to live with our mother-in-law and sister-in-law. He said we would leave. And my father-in-law agreed that it was the best course of action. I was surprised and touched by their concern and firm decision to protect me. Our mother-in-law then clung to my husband, pleading if he was going to abandon his aging mother. Sister-in-law started making excuses, saying her meanness was just her way of showing affection in reverse. So they begged us not to leave and asked us to continue living in the house. My father-in-law then confirmed with our mother-in-law and sister-in-law, asking if they were okay with us, the couple, continuing to live in this house. Both of them nodded emphatically, confirming that it was indeed what they wanted. Then, my father-in-law and husband pressed our mother-in-law and sister-in-law to leave the house. "It's impossible for my wife to live with you two. If you want us to stay, then it's only fair that you two leave. You wanted us to stay and not to leave, right? So, we will grant your wish by making you two leave." Confronted with being on the receiving end of their own words, our mother-in-law and sister-in-law clung to my husband and father-in-law. My father-in-law, fed up, shrugged off our mother-in-law's clinging arm and pushed her away. My father-in-law even told my mother-in-law to sign the divorce papers before leaving. Our mother-in-law, feeling cornered, turned to me, begging for help. My sister-in-law also implored me to convince my husband and father-in-law. The house renovation was for my father-in-law's benefit, not for you guys. I thought my mother-in-law might consider it a secondary matter, but instead of stopping my sister-in-law's rampage, she joined in showing hostility towards me. Living together under strain with people you dislike only leads to feeling miserable, right? I prefer living without the presence of people I dislike, rather than forcing myself to endure their company, I added, rejecting the requests of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They were forced to choose between living alone in an old house that might collapse soon or finding a new place to live together, just the two of them. With no funds for rebuilding the house, they had no choice but to leave. My mother-in-law thought that even after a divorce, she would receive alimony and a share of the property, along with a small pension. She assumed my sister-in-law would also work, so they wouldn't struggle to live. Later, they would learn how naive this thought was. There were times when I was alone with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, away from the eyes of my father-in-law and husband. Each time, they threatened me, asking if I knew what would happen if I forced them out. Eventually, fed up with their threats, I retaliated, saying that whether I did something or not, the situation wouldn't change. At that point, my mother-in-law, in frustration, threw a raw egg at me. The egg hit my head and broke, causing me to be drenched in raw egg from head to toe. As soon as I looked away from her, she tried to attack me. My father-in-law happened to walk by and shouted at her. My husband also appeared, and upon seeing me covered in egg, he pushed my mother-in-law away. She stumbled and stepped on the broken shells, writhing in pain. My sister-in-law, finding the situation amusing, filmed me covered in egg and laughed. Throwing out my mother-in-law, who has never worked outside before, along with my sister-in-law who has no intention of working, is bound to lead to no good. My father-in-law and husband had given my sister-in-law and mother-in-law a month's grace period to stay in the house until they found jobs. However, after the egg-throwing incident, their patience completely snapped, and they demanded them to leave immediately. My father-in-law, in a fit of anger, threw my mother-in-law's clothes and purse carelessly into the yard and dragged her out of the house. My husband hurled my sister-in-law's luggage out of the second-floor window, along with her suitcase.
Despite my sister-in-law tearfully begging me to do something as she clung to the veranda, I firmly closed the storm shutters after saying, "Take care." There's no obligation to listen to the pleas of a sister-in-law who only cozies up when it's convenient and quickly shows hostility again. But then, I remembered something I had forgotten to tell my sister-in-law. As I opened the window slightly, she, thinking she might be forgiven, smiled.
"Oh, by the way, I almost forgot to tell you, you've got an alimony claim coming from your ex-husband and your affair partner's wife."
My sister-in-law's face instantly turned pale. I had my suspicions about her divorce, so I consulted with my husband and had a detective agency investigate the reasons for it. Turns out, my sister-in-law had an affair even though she knew the man was married, and she was afraid of her ex-husband finding out. If you're scared of getting caught, you shouldn't have had an affair in the first place, I thought. Panicked, my sister-in-law concocted a different reason and proposed divorce to her husband herself. The money she got from my mother-in-law for her so-called outings was actually for her affair escapades. Thinking she had to escape before getting caught, she told her ex-husband she wanted a divorce immediately, not bothering with property division or any other complicated matters. Afterwards, my sister-in-law's ex-husband, puzzled by the unnatural divorce, hired a detective agency to conduct a background investigation. It was there that the fact of my sister-in-law's affair was discovered. At the same time, the mistress's wife, suspicious of her husband's inexplicable behavior, had also hired a detective agency. Coincidentally, it was the same agency I had hired. As a result, I asked them to unleash their anger on my sister-in-law without holding back. As for the reason for my sister-in-law's divorce, she claimed it was because our father-in-law needed home care and begged her to return home. However, her ex-husband was willing to help with the caregiving. My sister-in-law made up a story that our father-in-law didn't want a man's help and insisted on divorce. She should not have arbitrarily set up our father-in-law as needing care. I despise people who use unfortunate settings of family members to escape their responsibilities. After being kicked out of our family home, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law temporarily moved in with my mother-in-law's niece. However, the niece, who had a bad relationship with my sister-in-law from the past, refused them. Desperately, my sister-in-law pawned off the jewelry her lover had given her. She had bragged about getting a good price for the accessories, but it turned out they were just cheap trinkets, almost worthless. The divorce between my father-in-law and mother-in-law was officially settled. My mother-in-law's anticipated property division didn't go as she hoped. My mother-in-law had squandered my father-in-law's retirement funds. In exchange for not demanding repayment, the property division was offset. Penniless and with no life skills, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law resorted to reselling some of their extravagant purchases to make ends meet. As their sellable items dwindled, my sister-in-law reluctantly worked part-time jobs but often got fired due to unexcused absences. Their pride prevented them from living on the streets, but they only worked when absolutely necessary. Now, they live together in an old apartment with no bath and a shared toilet.
"You should work too, Mom. If you hadn't started mistreating your daughter-in-law and tried to kick her out, none of this would have happened. It's your fault for shamelessly having an affair. If you hadn't come back home, I could have gotten along with the daughter-in-law."
Their arguments, regardless of day or night, are heard outside. Even if my sister-in-law hadn't returned, my mother-in-law never liked me. But with my sister-in-law's return, she felt emboldened and strayed from the right path. I don't sympathize with them, nor do I pity them. After living for more than half a century, failing to control such behavior is their own fault. As for my sister-in-law, there's nothing to say. Despite agreeing to pay her alimony in installments, she broke the promise and was demanded to pay in full. She borrowed money from dangerous people and is now targeted by them. Despite their hardships, they have not grown. I expect them to continue struggling at the bottom due to their naive mindset. The renovation of our family home went smoothly. The old house had its charm, but the newly renovated modern exterior isn't bad either. We made the entire first floor barrier-free. My father-in-law, not wanting to be a burden, combats aging by going to the gym. He looks younger, and my husband, not to be outdone, has made weekend walks a routine. We are enjoying our fulfilling days.
Choosing a younger woman over an old hag like you is only natural, right?
If I'm an old hag, then you're an old geezer. I wanted to snap back with that but held it in, glaring at my husband's smirking face. True, I'm older than my husband and the oldest in this house. The young woman my husband referred to, almost twice my junior, is none other than our daughter-in-law. Yes, the person my husband had an affair with is our son's wife. And she, being called a young woman, seemed pleased, clinging to my husband's arm and looking down on me with disdain.
Really, don't you feel sorry for her? A woman who marries only to have her husband turn out like this, it's no wonder she'd have an affair or two.
My husband said dismissively, referring to our son. Such heartless words for our son who had just received a terminal diagnosis. I was about to yell, but a calm voice spoke from behind me.
Hey, Mom.
Our son, caught in this mess, had a surprisingly serene face. But his eyes betrayed an uncontainable anger.
I need your help with something.
Okay? My name is Kelly, a 55-year-old office worker. My husband Nick is younger, 51 years old. We met 30 years ago through a hobby, mountaineering. There was a group with a wide age range, from 20s to 60s, and a roughly equal gender distribution.
Mountaineering is great, isn't it?
Why did you start, Kelly? Nick was approachable, bright, and easy to talk to even on first meeting.
I started because of my dad.
Inspired by your dad, that's nice.
What about you, Nick? Why did you start mountaineering?
Well, if there's a mountain, a guy just wants to climb it.
What's that about?
His open, indiscriminate nature quickly made us friends. How old are you, Kelly?
Me?
I'm 26.
My type is a mature woman.
Really?
That means you're younger, right?
How old are you?
22.
So young.
It's just a 4-year difference.
It's quite a difference.
Is it?
Our conversation was so enjoyable. That day, the day we met, he asked me out on the mountain summit.
Actually, I fell for you at first sight.
My heart had already been his during the climb, so I immediately agreed. From that day, we were a couple, sharing our passion for mountaineering. We enjoyed dates and never running out of things to talk about. A year into our relationship, I found out I was pregnant. This led to our marriage. After marrying, I realized Nick wasn't much of a saver. He was a hard-working employee, but at 23, he earned less than me and tended to spend his paycheck immediately. Around my 9th month of pregnancy, I took maternity leave. Though I received some salary during this period, it was less than when I was working. We heavily relied on my nearby parents for financial support. They helped not just with money but in various ways, and I gave birth to a healthy boy. We named our son Joshua and raised him with great care. I returned to work before Joshua turned 1. Balancing work and childcare was challenging, but we supported our family through both our jobs. Joshua grew up healthy and lively. In a blink, he turned 24. After graduating from college, he lived on his own and seemed to work hard. One day, he called saying, "I have something important to discuss with you, Mom and Dad. Please keep next Sunday free." It was that Sunday. My husband and I were both nervous. When the doorbell rang and I opened the door, there stood Joshua and a woman about his age. She was a demure, pretty woman.
"Mom, Dad, let me introduce you. This is Nancy, whom I'm currently dating."
"Nice to meet you. I'm Nancy," she said, bowing slightly.
"What a charming lady,"
my husband remarked, and Joshua beamed happily. "We're planning to get married," Joshua announced. Nancy was apparently Joshua's co-worker. Hearing about my son getting married filled me with a deep sense of joy.
Gosh, Joshua is at the age to get married. What's with that nostalgic tone, Mom? So, what do you like about Nancy?
I asked straightforwardly, though it felt a bit bold.
She's usually reserved, but speaks her mind when it matters. She even stands up to me, her coworker, without hesitation. That's because Nick is. Let's not start with the critiques. My husband interjected, and everyone burst into laughter. Watching their affectionate interaction filled me with happiness. After Joshua and Nancy left, I spoke to my husband. She's a wonderful woman, isn't she? Yes, quite charming. You keep saying charming a lot. I sighed. Do I still look young? You look younger than your age, but don't take Nancy's words too seriously. She was just being polite. I was 52 and my husband was 48, but he seemed thrilled with Nancy's compliment about his looks. 2 years after the marriage proposal, 26-year-old Joshua and his wife came over. We're thinking of buying our own home and need to save up. Could we move in with you? Move in? I don't mind, but you have Nancy's consent, right? Our house is spacious with extra rooms. There was enough space for Joshua and his wife. However, I doubted any daughter-in-law would be thrilled about living with her mother-in-law so soon. When I asked, it turned out Nancy was the one who suggested it. In a later discussion with all four of us, Nancy seemed genuinely excited about living together. I asked my husband, "What do you think, honey?" He looked delighted. If they live with us, we can see our grandchildren right away if they're born. Nodding in agreement. I understood his enthusiasm for potential grandchildren. We all agreed to start living together. I was still working, so I wasn't home much. Nancy quit her job after getting married and became a full-time homemaker. She took care of the house during the day. She has been a great help, taking on responsibilities like receiving deliveries and taking care of laundry and meal preparations. Thankfully, our limited time together meant fewer conflicts and life was smooth. But this arrangement didn't last long. About a year in, we discovered Joshua had a disease weakening his immune system. The dinner on the day of the diagnosis was silent. I tried to accept it, but couldn't help fearing the worst, leading to a sleepless night. After the diagnosis, Nancy started working to help with Joshua's medical expenses and was frequently out. As Joshua's condition worsened, he eventually needed a wheelchair. We all supported him and decided to rely on a daytime caregiver. One evening while I was washing dishes, my daughter-in-law, Nancy, had a request. I have sudden work tomorrow. But it's the day I'm supposed to take Joshua to the hospital. I tried to say no, but they insisted I must come in. Kelly, can you take Joshua to the hospital for me? Of course. Thanks. Oh, Mom's taking me tomorrow? Joshua's frail voice came from the living room, connected to the kitchen. I hurried over to listen. After the hospital, can we go shopping? There's something I want to buy. Sure. Why don't we grab some pancakes after shopping? There's that new pancake place, right? Nick suggested, browsing on his phone. Sounds good. Let's have lunch then. The next day, I pushed Joshua's wheelchair to the hospital. It was a busy Monday, and the crowded hospital seemed to tire Joshua. So, we decided to skip shopping and head home early. Joshua told me in the car that he wanted to buy a gift for Nancy. To thank her for always supporting him. But it's pathetic. I can't even shop for what I want. And we didn't get it today. He muttered sadly and I felt a lump in my throat hearing his words. Your intention is enough, I assured him, but he didn't respond. So I tried to sound cheerful. How about we make some pasta for lunch? We arrived home much earlier than planned. To my surprise, Nancy's car was there, though she was supposed to be at work. Huh? Did Nancy not go to work? As I got out of the car and passed Nancy's car, I saw something horrifying. Inside her car were Nancy and Nick, who was supposed to be at work. Joshua, can you go inside first? I asked, helping him into the house. After he was inside, I saw Nick through the car window. Crouching down, fumbling with something. Peering in, I caught him trying to buckle his belt in the cramped car over Nancy.
The car seat was reclined, and they were in a compromising position. Not at all like a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. I knocked on the window and told them to come inside.
So, what exactly were you two doing in that tight space?
I confronted them in a room separate from where Joshua rested. The situation was undeniably suspicious. But they didn't seem flustered. Waiting for one of them to speak, Nick snorted.
It's obvious, isn't it? What else would a man and a woman do in a cramped car?
His brazen response shocked me. I saw my husband with such an ugly expression for the first time. His attitude and words instantly made my blood boil.
Man and woman? You're her father-in-law, and there's a significant age gap.
Age is just a number. It's all about looks.
I'm younger looking than sick Joshua, aren't I?
He's pale and all.
You think that way?
I was just helping Nancy. She can't be intimate with her immobile husband. Poor Nancy, crying secretly knowing Joshua's life is short. I just offered her some comfort.
You just took advantage of her. And Nancy, are you okay with this?
I confronted my son's wife, who was standing beside my husband with a look of dissatisfaction on her face.
I want to enjoy my life too.
Work, hospital visits, house chores. I hate it.
Why should I suffer while others my age have fun?
Right, Nancy is still young. It's sad she's stuck caring for a sick person and working every day.
Shut up!
I yelled at Nick. Nick has money and health, so he can fulfill my desires. I've decided to switch to him. Nancy declared, and I was repulsed by their callousness.
So, you've been involved since Joshua got sick?
Yes. Nick admitted nonchalantly.
Is all this true?
The living room door opened, and there was Joshua, trembling with rage, looking at them.
Is it true? While I'm suffering from illness, have you two been having a good time?
Joshua confronted them loudly. However, it was the body of my son, weakened to its limits. His weakened body must have struggled to shout. I went to him and put my hand on his back.
Joshua doesn't deserve to be yelled at.
Nancy raised her voice.
I thought I'd be happy after marrying. I quit my job for this, but ended up working again. No trips, no shopping, just hospital, work, and home. I've been sacrificing my desires for your care.
That's right, Joshua. You should thank Nancy first. Joshua clenched his fists. I couldn't hold back and scolded Nancy.
What kind of attitude is that? We have a caregiver during the day, and at night it's mainly me and your father taking care of you. And you say you had to work, but we were the ones paying most of the living expenses. The treatment costs were coming out of Joshua's insurance.
Nancy's words sounded as if she had sacrificed everything, but that wasn't the case. She hadn't been taking care of Joshua at all. She was out working during the day, and at night, it was mostly me who looked after him. Even house chores like cooking and laundry, which we were supposed to share equally after she started working, ended up being mostly on me because she was overwhelmed at her new job. I had been supporting them financially and taking care of everything. At times, I felt like nothing more than a maid. Yet, I had cooperated, considering her plight of having a husband with a life-threatening illness at a young age. And to be treated this way was unbearable. Nick, however, seemed completely oblivious to my feelings.
Looks like Nancy was quite dissatisfied with a lot of things.
Nick said with a vile smirk.
You can't satisfy your wife with that body, right? A husband who's not only broke but also a burden. It's only natural for her to leave a sick husband like you.
Right.
Don't make me the villain. The bad one is you for getting sick.
I couldn't contain my anger at a daughter-in-law who didn't provide care, didn't contribute to household chores, and didn't bring in any income. And my disgust for Nick, who, despite being a father, could insult his suffering son to such an extent.
Enough from both of you.
Why did Joshua, who had been planning to buy a gift for his wife after his hospital visit, have to endure this? I was infuriated.
I want a divorce.
I told Nick.
I'm divorcing you.
That suits me fine.
I'd rather be with a young and pretty girl than an older woman. I'll give you your divorce.
Nick replied, putting his arm around Nancy and snorting.
Nancy, you should divorce him too,
Joshua said to her in a trembling voice. I expected her to agree, but she immediately refused.
No. If I divorce you now, I won't get your inheritance, right? After all the hardship I've endured, I deserve it.
What are you saying?
Please divorce my son and do whatever you want with that man,
I pleaded. It was as if she was waiting for Joshua to pass away sooner.
No. But I'll leave this house. I'll come back for the inheritance once you're gone,
Nancy said, and she and Nick quickly packed and left. Joshua maintained his composure beside me, still in shock.
Mom, I need your help with something,
Joshua said firmly.
I'll never forgive those two. There's a quiet rage burning inside me.
I could see a quiet flame of anger burning within my son. Unlike me, he possessed a calmness in the face of it all, which was truly admirable.
What do you have in mind?
Yes.
I'll do whatever it takes to help you, Joshua. Can you listen to my plan then?
Of course. Joshua and I devised a plan. Later, only Nick returned home. He brought the divorce papers, and Nick and I eventually finalized our divorce. As for Nancy, she never responded to any of our calls. 5 years later, Joshua passed away. I always wished he could have outlived me. His funeral was attended by many, including medical staff and colleagues from his previous job. Among the many attendees, I spotted 2 faces I hadn't forgotten in 5 years. My ex-husband and Nancy.
Oh, you're here.
They both looked shabby. Nick, who had always boasted about his looks, appeared older than his age, his cheeks sunken. Nancy had lost her initial charm, her face hardened. They were both wearing worn-out clothes. As soon as they saw me, their eyes lit up like cats who had found their prey.
I'm here for the inheritance,
Nancy said to me as if it were the most natural thing in the world.
I deserve to inherit because of all the hardship I went through caring for him.
That's right.
There should be an inheritance. You're not planning to keep it all to yourself, are you? A child's property should be inherited by their parents. Just because we divorced after an affair doesn't mean our parent-child relationship is over. I'm entitled to Joshua's inheritance too.
Hurry up and give us the money! This man has no savings, and these past 5 years have been really tough. But I've endured it all, thinking I'd get Joshua's inheritance. The affair was 5 years ago, so you've forgiven us by now, right? Nancy's transformation was laughable. She used to sweetly call his name, and now she refers to him so casually. The only reason my ex-husband had money to spend freely was because I gave him an allowance. Since my salary was higher than his, I've been giving him money every month since we got married. I didn't want to risk him hiding his salary or not contributing to household expenses. So I gave him a bit more than necessary to avoid wasteful spending or hiding money. Despite divorcing me and marrying a younger woman, his nature hadn't changed. He was still no good at saving money and spent whatever he had. I bet life has been quite hard for the two of them since they left so boldly. I wonder where they found out about Joshua's death. They're really like hyenas.
Come on, give us the inheritance.
You must have savings for a house, right? Don't think you can use it all up. I'm taking that along with the inheritance. They pressed me, but I stood my ground and said firmly,
There's no inheritance for you two.
What do you mean?
This is what I mean.
I showed them a document. Their faces turned ashen upon seeing it. Give it to me. Nancy snatched the document, trembling. Donation certificate. She read slowly.
Yes, Joshua recently realized his time was near and donated his entire fortune to a medical research institution. This is the certificate. All of Joshua's inheritance you were after is gone.
No way!
What was the point of enduring these 5 years?
She seemed to have grown tired of Nick, staying with him only for the sake of Joshua's inheritance. Then give me the money.
I'm the one who took care of your son. I took him to the hospital, worked part-time, and sacrificed myself for him. I deserve to be paid.
Nancy demanded money from me.
There's something I haven't been able to tell you because you two have been missing. Let me tell you now. What?
Nancy raised her eyebrows. I revealed another truth.
You're no longer Joshua's wife. The divorce has already been finalized. So, you don't have any right to his inheritance. What? That's a lie.
Nancy was shocked. The truth is, on the day Nick and Nancy's affair was exposed, Joshua recorded their conversation from the other side of the door. After they left our home, Joshua and I took the recording to a lawyer. We explained that Joshua wanted to divorce his wife, who had become unreachable due to her affair. The lawyer suggested a court process. Public notice was given, and with Nancy absent, the trial began. Joshua's divorce was easily granted.
So, Nancy, even though you've been acting like Joshua's wife, you've been a stranger for a long time. A stranger? Such a foolishness. To think you've been living with another man for 5 years.
If Nick truly loved Nancy, he might have changed his heart and urged her to divorce and remarry him. But in the end, Nick just wanted a young woman who would provide him with physical comfort and care. Neither of them made any effort to change their situation, simply waiting eagerly for Joshua to pass away. That's why Nancy didn't realize she was single, and Nick didn't want to let go of his young wife who catered to him. I sighed heavily and turned to face them.
Furthermore, I'm demanding compensation. You'll have to pay for the damages. Damages? You can't be serious. We're already in debt. We thought Joshua's inheritance would clear our debts, but we can't pay any damages. Exactly. Why are you demanding damages now? I always intended to demand compensation. You two just disappeared before I could. Now that you're back, of course, I'm going to ask for it. By the way, I've recorded everything you've said since you arrived. So, don't even try to deny the affair now.
I informed them, and they were so infuriated by my words that they lunged at me.
Hey! What are you doing?
Fortunately, medical staff and company employees present at the scene restrained them, so I wasn't hurt.
Are you all right? Yes, thank you.
While being restrained, Nick and Nancy continued to yell, "Give us the money." Then I heard the sound of a police car, and officers arrived.
You two are suspected of fraud. Please come with us to the station.
Someone at Joshua's funeral must have called the police. Nick and Nancy were taken away by the police. Later, I learned from the police that they had been involved in fraud to repay their debts and had other criminal charges against them. They would be spending some time behind bars. I was surprised they had stooped to fraud. The two who had hurled insults at Joshua now faced social consequences. Nancy wasted her valuable 20s, despite all her complaints. While I sympathized with her for having a husband who fell ill young, everything else was her own doing. I felt no pity for the two who had even resorted to criminal acts. I didn't know the extent of their debts, but they might be chased by repayments until their deaths. I might not get the damages I demanded, but I didn't care anymore. If they were suffering that much, let them suffer out of my sight. It's been years since Joshua passed away. But I still receive thank you letters from patients every day, grateful for Joshua's donation. I read these letters and feel proud of my son's choice. His donation, which never reached the two who awaited his death, is helping many people. Joshua apologized for leaving me with nothing when he told me about his plan. But years after his funeral, I still receive letters of gratitude. His choice continues to nourish others' lives. How proud I am. I am truly fortunate to have had such a wonderful son. I continued working after retirement. My job is fulfilling and enjoyable. I'm glad I acquired specialized qualifications and knowledge when I was younger. Back then, I was desperate to raise my salary for Joshua's sake, studying hard for certifications. I have enough assets to live on my own, and I owe it all to Joshua. I still keep up with my hobby of mountain climbing.
Joshua, Thank you. I'll make sure to enjoy the rest of my life. Wait for me there.
I whispered to his smiling photo.
Mom, I can't take it anymore. It's impossible with only $100 a month for allowance.
Emily, my daughter who had moved to New York for college, had come home several times a year, but I had never heard such a complaint from her.
What? I've been transferring $2,200 every month.
At first, I couldn't understand what Emily was talking about. I raised my voice in surprise, but Emily shouted back, equally surprised.
What? $2,200?
Could the transfer have gone to the wrong account? No, that couldn't be. If the transfer had been wrong, I would have heard from my sister-in-law and her husband. The monthly allowance was actually being transferred to their account. Considering Emily's busy college life and the possibility of her forgetting to pay rent, I had been transferring the combined amount for her living expenses and rent to my sister-in-law's account. They were supposed to hand over $1,600 to Emily after deducting rent. Emily, crying on the phone, wouldn't lie about such things.
No way!
A thought crossed my mind. One I didn't want to consider, but it seemed the only explanation. After ending the call with Emily, I hurried to a certain place. My name is Julia, 47 years old. Currently, I work part-time at a local supermarket. Since marrying my husband, Jeff, we had 2 children. Our son, Chris, is 23 this year. Emily, our daughter, is 20 and currently studying at a university in New York. Emily has always been a bit scatterbrained and lively, so I never imagined she would get into one of the top universities in New York. Unlike Emily, Chris was always serious and good at his studies from childhood, but he's almost in a state of seclusion now. The trigger for his seclusion was failing his college entrance exams. Chris, being introverted, had few friends and took pride in being more academically inclined than his socially active sister, Emily. He always told himself, studying is more important than playing for the future. He might have also harbored a feeling of not wanting to lose to Emily, who was enjoying her youth. Despite maintaining top grades in high school, Chris failed his college entrance exams. Everyone thought his admission was a sure thing, so the shock was tremendous for him. He couldn't understand why he failed. On the day of the results, expecting his success, we prepared a lavish meal and waited for his return. But the moment he came back, I knew something terrible had happened. He had a look of despair I had never seen before. Since then, Chris barely left his room. He's not aggressive towards us and communicates when necessary. But he shows no intention of working. Whenever we bring up employment, he shuts down. Emily, witnessing Chris's failure, seemed to have put in her own effort in her way. She studied diligently in secret, balancing it well with her leisure time. She had a clear dream of becoming a teacher and aimed for a prestigious university for that purpose. She succeeded. Much to the astonishment of Chris, who couldn't believe it. Though not on bad terms, Emily's university acceptance seemed to have accelerated Chris's withdrawal. With Emily living in a dorm in New York and Chris in seclusion, our family's finances were stretched thin, even with my husband working. Having been a stay-at-home mom for many years, I decided to start working at a local supermarket due to these circumstances. Having never worked outside since getting married, everything felt new and challenging. But I had no choice but to work hard for my kids. Emily, who moved to New York for college, was living in an apartment managed by my husband's sister, Michelle, and her husband. Michelle's husband earns a living through real estate management, inherited from his parents. I'm truly grateful for their support, especially since college tuition alone is quite expensive. I hadn't seen Michelle and her husband since our wedding, so honestly, I didn't know them very well. Now that they were renting a room to Emily at a discounted rate, I started communicating with them over the phone. My only impression of them was from a brief conversation at the wedding, and I felt uneasy about their offer. Back then, it was clear they didn't think highly of me. There was a family gathering just before the wedding, and throughout, they seemed displeased. Even when I greeted them, their responses were curt, to the point where I thought, I'd rather not deal with these people. We hadn't interacted for a long time, but with Emily's college enrollment, Jeff reached out to them.
Have you been keeping in touch with your sister regularly?
I asked Jeff, feeling anxious, but his response was vague.
Yeah, we chat occasionally, and I trust my sister completely.
It was obvious they weren't in close contact, but Jeff seemed to have a lot of trust in his sister. Not wanting to sound bitter, I agreed to accept their offer. Emily, too, seemed apprehensive about relying on an aunt she hadn't met, but she couldn't complain. She readily agreed to our suggestion. Once Emily started living in Michelle's apartment, Jeff started receiving frequent calls from his sister. I thought she was just concerned about Emily. But listening to their conversations, it didn't seem that way.
She's just nervous because she hasn't seen you guys in years. Can you cut her some slack?
It appeared Michelle and her husband were displeased with Emily's behavior. But what did they expect from Emily, their niece? Since Emily herself didn't complain, I assumed they were only venting to Jeff, but my anxiety grew day by day. Can I really trust these people with Emily? I subtly asked Jeff if Emily was getting along with them, but he always evaded the question. Emily wouldn't tell me the truth out of consideration, so all I could do was trust Michelle and her husband. But that trust was soon betrayed. One day, when Jeff and I were shopping at a department store, I was buying groceries while Jeff wanted to check out a different floor. Seeing no reason to object, I let him go. I finished shopping earlier than usual and went to look for Jeff on the second floor. Just as I was about to call him, I saw him in a high-end brand store. What's he doing? I wondered, feeling uneasy. I approached him and asked, "What are you doing here?" Startled by my sudden appearance, Jeff looked visibly flustered.
Well, it's just that.
He seemed to have bought something, and a salesperson was packing the item. Could you please confirm the shipping address? Upon questioning Jeff, I learned that the purchase was for Michelle. She's taking care of Emily, and she insisted on a gift, he explained. Appalled, I immediately suggested moving Emily to another place. But Jeff refused, saying it would be disrespectful to Michelle and her husband. Fortunately, Emily seemed unharmed, and Jeff pleaded, "Let's just see how things go a little longer." Overwhelmed by his earnestness, I agreed to maintain the status quo. About a year after Emily started college, a phone call from her revealed a shocking truth.
Mom, I can't take it anymore. Surviving on just $100 a month allowance is impossible.
I had heard nothing like this from Emily, who had come home several times a year.
What? I'm transferring $2,200 every month.
Initially, I couldn't understand what Emily was talking about. I blurted out in shock, but Emily, not to be outdone, yelled back.
What? $2,200?
Could the transfer have gone to the wrong account? No, that couldn't be. If it had, my sister-in-law and her husband would have contacted us. I was transferring the monthly allowance to their account because, with Emily's busy life at college in New York, forgetting to pay rent would be disastrous. So, I had been sending the combined amount for her living expenses and rent to them. They were supposed to give Emily $1,600 after deducting the rent. Emily, crying on the phone, couldn't be lying. She must have been living on the edge. I hurriedly transferred a few $1,000s to Emily's account, even before verifying the facts with my sister-in-law. But there was someone else I needed to talk to before that. My son, Chris. He's the one who's been making the monthly transfers to Emily. Although Chris has been mostly confined to his room, I had asked him to do the transfers, so he would occasionally step outside. I trusted him with this important task, hoping it would be meaningful for him. I couldn't imagine Chris stealing the allowance. But he might know something. With a heavy heart, I knocked on Chris's door.
Chris, I just got a call from Emily. She says she's only receiving $100 a month.
A heavy sigh came from inside the room.
You think I stole it?
Chris's direct response caught me off guard. Sensing the slight doubt I had harbored, I hastily denied it, but Chris didn't respond further. That night, when Jeff came home, I immediately shared this puzzling situation.
That's it. I need to have a serious talk with Chris.
Jeff seemed convinced Chris had stolen the money. Probably thinking it made sense given Chris's reclusive state and lack of income. Packages, likely bought online, were frequently delivered to Chris. Jeff suspected these were bought with the money meant for Emily.
It's not decided yet, is it? Can you please contact your sister to see if she knows anything?
I asked, wanting to believe in Chris. Jeff seemed to think I was suspecting his sister and responded irritably.
You think my sister stole it? If you're so sure, why don't you call her yourself?
Feeling it was pointless to continue discussing with Jeff, I decided to contact my sister-in-law. When I told her about Emily's call, she reacted so dramatically that it almost seemed exaggerated.
What? You're transferring $2,200? I'm only getting $700 a month.
She should have been receiving $600 for rent, so her reaction made me question why she hadn't found it strange that Emily was only receiving $100.
Jeff said your son is the one making the transfers, right?
From her tone, it was clear she suspected Chris had taken the money.
Indeed, I ask my son to make the transfers every month, but there's no way he would do anything to trouble his sister.
I was angered by her insinuations and blurted out defensively.
So what are you saying? Are you accusing us of stealing the money you sent?
She was furious one moment and then abruptly hung up the phone the next. I just wanted to know if she had any idea about the situation, but her accusatory tone towards Chris felt off to me. A few days after Emily's call.
Are you a relative of Emily?
I received a call from a hospital in New York on my cell phone. It turned out that Emily had collapsed from overwork and was rushed to the hospital. Though they assured me her life wasn't in danger, I hurried to her side after getting the call. Led by a nurse, I entered Emily's hospital room and saw her lying there, much more gaunt than before.
Mom, I'm sorry for worrying you.
She whispered weakly, forcing a smile for me. After the call, I had transferred some money to her, but it seems her previous overexertion had caught up with her. She told me she had been working night shifts after college classes every day. With just $100 from my sister-in-law, she couldn't even cover her utility bills, let alone food and transportation expenses. Why didn't you say anything when you came home? I asked through tears. But Emily simply said she didn't want to worry me. Had my sister-in-law Michelle not noticed Emily's condition over the past year? Shouldn't she have shown some concern? Although I had been grateful to Michelle and her husband for providing a cheap room, my gratitude had now turned to anger. I explained to Emily that I'd be staying in New York for a bit and then headed straight to Michelle's house. When I rang the doorbell and announced myself, Michelle seemed surprised to see me.
Well, yeah, collapsing from just $100 a month isn't surprising,
she said with a laugh when I told her about Emily's condition.
Aren't you concerned? Didn't you notice anything odd about Emily?
I demanded, unable to contain my anger.
Who do you think you are? Blaming us? Do you realize who's been allowing your daughter to live?
With a ferocity as if she was about to lunge at me, my sister-in-law yelled. I had felt something was off during our phone conversation, and now it was clear. It seemed like she had something to hide and was getting defensive when accused, which couldn't be helped.
First of all, your good-for-nothing son. It's obvious he's been stealing the money. And you're blaming us? Do you have any proof?
Michelle insulted Chris and ended our conversation abruptly, slamming the door in my face. I stayed in New York for a while to watch over Emily. During this time, I told her about the allowance and that Chris was responsible for transferring it.
Aunt Michelle says my brother stole it? No way, Chris would never do that.
Listening to her, I realized Emily had been suspicious of Michelle and her husband's actions since starting college. She thought it unlikely that I would only provide a $100 allowance, but was too afraid to bring it up, fearing a mistake. My heart ached for her consideration. A few days later, after all the tests confirmed there was no serious issue, Emily's color improved and she was discharged.
I'm sorry for all the worry, but I'm fine now.
Despite her lingering distrust towards Michelle and her husband, Emily was also worried about Chris. Indeed, I was concerned whether Jeff had said anything to Chris, accusing him of theft. I handed Emily enough money and decided to return home for the time being. Upon returning home and checking with my husband, it seemed there was no contact from my sister-in-law. He also hadn't spoken much with Chris, which was a relief as it meant the worst-case scenario was avoided.
I went to see Emily and also stopped by Michelle's.
I told Jeff about Emily's worn-out state and her overworking for living expenses. I subtly criticized Michelle and her husband for their lack of concern.
Michelle's busy, probably only sees Emily when handing over the money each month.
Jeff said, more concerned about his sister than his own daughter's health.
Aren't you worried about your daughter collapsing? Is Michelle that important to you? She's calling Chris a thief.
Jeff frowned at my words.
It's obvious Chris did it, isn't it? What about all the packages he receives? How else would he afford them?
He said excitedly, then realized he had gone too far. He seemed to regret speaking so harshly.
Anyway, please stop speaking ill of my sister. Maybe ask Chris a bit more if he knows anything.
Saying this, my husband left the room, looking embarrassed. After a while, I heard the door on the second floor open. It was Chris coming out of his room. He must have overheard our earlier argument because we had raised our voices. Coming down the stairs, Chris let out a big sigh and looked me in the eyes.
I swear, I didn't steal any money. There's no way I would steal Emily's important money.
His face was earnest. And it was unusual for him to leave his room and come to me like this. He must really want to clear his suspicion.
Mom, I'll go to Aunt Michelle's and ask her directly.
I nodded emphatically at Chris's words. The next day, Chris and I headed straight to Michelle's house. It had been years since I last went out with Chris. Despite the situation, I couldn't help but think about that. Throughout the train ride, Chris was silent, but from his demeanor, I was convinced Michelle and her husband were stealing the money. Chris's eyes said it all. And he was worried about Emily. He couldn't forgive Michelle and her husband for putting his dear sister through this. He said he was going to ask, but I knew he wanted to confront them about their actions. He couldn't stand the thought of being wronged more than their disregard for Emily. When we arrived at the station, we immediately went to Michelle's house. I assumed if we called ahead, they would find a reason to turn us away. Sure enough, Michelle was clearly flustered by our unexpected visit. She seemed incredulous that Chris, whom she'd heard was reclusive, was here.
Aunt Michelle, sorry to bother you suddenly. About Emily's allowance, I've been transferring $2,200 every month without fail. This is the correct account number, right?
Chris didn't give Michelle a chance to interject, showing her the account number noted on his smartphone.
This is important. Can you check it right now?
Michelle looked evasive, but urged by Chris, she went to get her bank book. When she returned with it, Chris didn't waste a moment.
Is this right? Can you confirm the number for me?
After Chris recited the account number, Michelle responded.
It seems correct.
Hearing this, Chris nodded and continued.
I thought so. Could you please open that book and show us? If the amount written is $700, then I must have made some mistake.
Chris was straightforward, looking Michelle in the eyes. Indeed, if Michelle was right about Chris stealing the money, it would all be proven by that book.
Mom said that when she visited last time, you were sure I was stealing the money, right? If you show us now, she'll be convinced, won't she? Whether her son is lying or not.
It was like a scene from a detective show, with Chris trying to prove his innocence. Michelle, on the other hand, was just standing there, overwhelmed by the situation.
Why do I have to show you what's in my bank book? Are you saying I stole it?
Michelle was clearly agitated and snapped at Chris. But Chris didn't rise to her provocation, staying calm.
I'm not saying you stole anything, Aunt Michelle. Maybe there was some trouble with the system. Anyway, can you please show us where the depositor's name says Chris?
I joined in, urging her, please, we just want to clear this up. Michelle's face turned red as she screamed.
Enough already. Don't act all high and mighty when you're the one stealing the money.
She was like a child throwing a tantrum, trying to chase us out. Then, as my sister-in-law shouted, "Get out!" Chris, defying her, squeezed out a forceful response.
I'll prove you stole it, no doubt about it.
Chris's intense voice silenced my sister-in-law for a moment. Seeing this, Chris said, "That's enough for today," and turned his back to her. I followed Chris without a word, unable to speak.
Chris! Wait, Chris!
When I looked at his face, it was distorted with frustration. He was upset about not being able to prove his innocence.
I shouldn't have spoken to you like I doubted you. But listen, I don't think you stole anything anymore.
I said this firmly, apologizing wholeheartedly to Chris. In response, as if answering my words, he muttered, "I know." I suggested visiting Emily, who was recovering. But Chris, still unable to prove his innocence, probably felt he couldn't face her. "Can I go home first?" he asked, then headed towards the station alone. After visiting Emily, I returned home later than Chris. He had returned before me and was holed up in his room, as usual, trying not to be noticed by my husband. Jeff too seemed embarrassed since then, avoiding both me and Chris. Pretending to bring food, I entered Chris's room.
I'm sorry, I couldn't do more. Emily's feeling better now, so don't worry.
Hearing about Emily's recovery, Chris seemed relieved and opened up.
I'm sorry for always causing worry. I've been doing some work online bit by bit, but I couldn't bring myself to say it.
His confession surprised me, and I let out an involuntary sound. Listening to Chris's story, I slowly understood what he meant.
Years of being a recluse would naturally make people suspect me of stealing,
he said with a self-deprecating laugh. To prove where the money for his packages came from, Chris revealed his secret. After failing his exams, he had initially escaped reality, doing nothing. But then, realizing he couldn't continue like that, he started self-studying programming and design. Chris, a quick learner and studious by nature, had grown to the point where he could earn money with these skills over the past few years.
I'm still an amateur, so I was going to tell you when I could make a living out of it.
Tears naturally flowed as I listened to my son's unexpected confession. Seeing me cry, Chris laughed, saying, "Don't cry, it's all right," but I knew he must have felt guilty inside. Shaking off his own insecurities, Chris spoke up again.
There's something else I want to talk to you about, Mom.
And so he began to speak with conviction.
That's why I came here.
The next day, in our living room, sat my sister-in-law, Christy. The content of Chris's conversation from yesterday was about another aunt of his, Christy. After his exam failure, Christy, who had always been close to Chris, showed more concern for him than even we did. His interest in programming started under her influence. Hearing about Emily's allowance issue, Chris first consulted with Christy. She had always known about the bad blood between Christy and my sister-in-law Michelle. Unlike my husband Jeff, who had absolute trust in Michelle, Christy didn't trust her. She was close enough to visit our house occasionally, but hated Michelle. Indeed, Christy had always been very helpful to me, more straightforward than Michelle. Christy suggested framing Michelle to make her confess. He seemed lively and happy around Christy, a rare sight for me. Grateful to Christy for making Chris this happy, I felt I couldn't thank her enough.
That jerk, making my dear nephew and niece suffer like this. I'll expose her soon,
Christy said, eager to teach Michelle a lesson, as she and Chris enthusiastically planned together. Without Christy, I shudder to think what might have become of Chris. Watching them, I felt conflicted as a parent, but I had no choice but to rely on Christy's plan. We readied ourselves and decided to confront Michelle again the next day. I was determined to make her regret insulting my dear son. Containing my eagerness, we prepared for the next day. The following day.
Did Jeff suspect anything?
Christy asked while munching on her lunch in the train heading to Michelle's house. Fortunately, Jeff seemed his usual self, unaware of our plan. I was worried he might side with his sister if he found out about our plan at this stage. He cares about Chris and Emily, but for some reason, he can't stand up to his sister. According to Christy, their relationship has always been like that.
It's not so much about trust or admiration, it's more like he can't defy her,
she said with a sense of resignation. Compared to my serious and dull husband, Christy was bright and carefree. She grew up seeing her sister-in-law bossing around her brother and was determined not to end up like that. Christy is still single and makes a living as a freelancer. Though Chris had failed his exams, seeing Christy living independently and on her terms must have inspired him not to give up. We enjoyed our time together, but soon we would be arriving in New York. Christy's plan seemed surprisingly simple, almost childlike, but she was confident.
"This is where I excel,"
she said, pointing to her head and smiling at me and Chris.
"Big sis, what's going on here?"
Arriving at Michelle's house, Christy confronted her in a seemingly distressed manner. Michelle seemed utterly unprepared for Christy's visit.
"I deposited the money for Chris once. And now I'm being accused of stealing it?"
Following Christy's instructions, Chris and I stayed hidden near Michelle's house, watching the two of them.
"What? Why would you make the deposit for Chris?"
Michelle asked, her anger evident.
"Because I live nearby. Unlike Chris, I keep proper transaction records."
At her words, Michelle's face turned pale.
"What do you mean by that? Are you also saying I stole it?"
Christy wouldn't let her get away with playing dumb.
"So where did the $1,600 go?" "Never mind, I'll take the transaction records and go to Jeff."
As Christy turned to leave, Michelle immediately shouted,
Wait. Just wait a minute. I understand.
Christy's plan worked perfectly, and Michelle took the bait.
"Say I was told by Chris to let him take some of the money for himself. It's obvious Jeff will believe me over a reclusive son."
At that moment, Christy grinned mischievously.
"Big sis, are you admitting that you stole Emily's money?"
Michelle, thinking Christy was shaking her down, clicked her tongue and responded, "As usual with you. It's obvious, isn't it?" It was indeed as we suspected. Watching this exchange, Chris burst out,
"So, you were the one who stole it?"
Michelle was taken aback at the sudden appearance of Chris.
"What are you doing here?"
Confused, she looked at Christy standing nearby, who couldn't help but burst into laughter.
"Big sis, you're so naive. You've always underestimated us, and that's why you were tricked so easily."
Christy then turned serious and pulled out her phone.
"Just so you know, I recorded our conversation."
Michelle glared at Christy resentfully, then turned to plead with me and Chris.
"I'm so sorry. I never meant to trouble Emily. It was just a moment of weakness, Chris, I'm sorry for saying such terrible things to you."
Michelle suddenly burst into a tirade and then, right there, she knelt down and apologized to us.
"Stop it, sis. It's embarrassing. I'll report this to Jeff, so just wait. Running away is useless, you know?"
Stunned by Christy's words, my sister-in-law began to sob right there. Urged by Christy's "let's go," Chris and I decided to leave the scene. Afterward, the three of us headed to Emily's apartment. The whole truth of the incident was revealed by Christy, proving Chris's innocence.
"But Emily never doubted Chris at all,"
I explained, but it seemed the two siblings understood each other's feelings well enough. Anyway, it was decided that we would move out of the apartment immediately. Due to the hardships of the past year, there was hardly any luggage in the room. It took less than an hour to pack up everything.
"Let's go home for now."
After a light meal, the four of us returned to the house where Jeff was waiting.
"I see."
Hearing our explanation and bringing Emily back home, Jeff let out a deep sigh. We played him the recording Christy made of her conversation with Michelle and explained everything. Shocked to learn of his sister's crime, Jeff seemed deeply affected. However, accepting the truth, he spoke heavily.
"Chris, I'm truly sorry for doubting you."
Jeff sincerely apologized. Chris accepted the apology with a nod.
Christy, send me that audio file. I'm going to the police now.
Jeff, resolute, decided to report the theft by Michelle and her husband to the police. It must have taken immense courage for him to make this decision. But now, maybe we were finally freed from his sister's control. A few days later, the police, informed by Jeff, arrested Michelle and her husband. The evidence of theft was clear in their bank account, and they quickly confessed. For a real estate company that relies on trust, this arrest was devastating. According to Jeff, who visited the police station as a relative of the accused, Michelle's mental state was deteriorating day by day. Betrayed by her brother and sister, she was in shock. Moreover, she seemed to understand that her real hell would begin after serving her sentence. The survival of their company was doubtful, and their luxurious lifestyle was now impossible. It was self-inflicted, but I couldn't help feeling a little sorry for Jeff. The money meant for Emily was returned from another account of Michelle and her husband. With that money, Emily rented a new apartment. This time without relying on them. Chris, along with Christy, started a small design company. This might be a good opportunity, Christy had decided. Seeing Chris like this seemed to lighten Jeff's load. Although he still felt guilty for doubting his son, they began to talk more than before. As a result, I felt closer to Jeff than I had in the past. Although Emily and Chris suffered because of Michelle, this incident brought our family closer together. It was truly a case of after the rain, the ground hardens. With Chris working, our family finances improved, but I decided to continue working too. Watching everyone, I couldn't help but feel the same. From now on, we would move forward together, including Christy, as a family of 5.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias.
Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sarah tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años, seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sarah y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sarah quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sarah completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sarah se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sarah quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sarah era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Dicen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber, los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Dicen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, PREN, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre PREN antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes. Te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Dicen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Dicen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso, que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación, todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador, aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije, hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche. Me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado. Dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones. Intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre. Aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente. Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales. 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco. Parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas. Había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos. Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche. No había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta. Los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse. No hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marcia Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marchen no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sara. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sara era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Sherry. Sherry alquilaba una habitación de Sarah. Cada centavo que Sarah ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Sherry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sarah no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Sherry explicó que Sarah estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Sherry dijo que Sarah no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sarah hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Sherry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foot resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sarah y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sarah conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.